This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakeland.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking. And Norbert Brunhuber in the third chair.
I'm so glad I bought into Warjack Futures.
With contributions from Total Fangirl
Vampires do not sparkle.
and our loyal listeners.
Are you crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming, coming at the speed of a sleek, trim, rejuvenated rule set that takes away a lot of the guesswork and creaky tactical decisions. Today's edition is brought to you by all of our fine friends over at Patreon. And we've redone the list, and this time, for some reason, it's in alphabetical order by first name. So we've got Aaron Walsh, Adon Tejeda, Adam Goodmurphy, Adam Hansen, Adam Harder. I think there's going to be a lot of other Adams, but today would also like to include the Libsyn Leper, Norbert Brunhuber. I'm Geek Limited Guardian, your host. Today our panelists are Russ, Archduke Runewood Wakeland, and special guest, the aforementioned Norbert, the Butcher of Cardoff, Brunhuber, machine aficionado, community organizer par excellence, and goodwill ambassador for all things metal and heavy. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Throughout history of the human race, there has been a one prevailing truth no matter the effort or endeavor under question. We're all looking for a new beginning. In fact, rebirth, regrowth, and renewal are so deeply entrenched in almost every major human civilization that it is hard to tell where ancient religions end and modern philosophy and psychology begin. Question. If we're so keen on rebirth and renewal, why do so many people whine when their favorite game renews itself? A. Their sacred cow has just been gored. B. Their favorite model is about to get nerfed. C. Their knowledge and wisdom is about to be rendered defunct. D. They may not be on the top of the heap no more. All Reliant Russ.
All of the above.
Kazazi Eliminator Norbert.
All of the above.
Wrong! The answer is E. If Privateer Press were giving away $20 bills with every new edition, there would be people complaining that they weren't bitcoins. Right, Ross? Issue number 2. Integrating personal data services on our games has become more and more of the new epic new thing as gaming has progressed over the last few years. From the beginning with Exilus and beyond even that, and going straight on through Golem Arcana and more, companies have been trying to incorporate gamers' fascination with gadgets and phones and their tabletop shenanigans. Question. On a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being Ogre and 10 being the dynamic duo of Lewis and Gilbert, how important is human customer service when trying to come up with the next great new minis game service app? Raj Rakim Russ.
I'm going to go with a 8.5.
UN Jefferson Norbert.
8.
Wrong! So very wrong!
thought I had
The
it.
answer is Googleplex! It breaks the paradigm. If you've got the best app ever, but it doesn't work for someone and your only response is, I can't help you, then you've got nothing. Issue number 3. Not that I'm bitter. A pair of eminent psychiatrists, Thomas Holmes and Richard Ray, once rated all the stressors of human life in order of their, stressfulness, I guess. Every conceivable stressor was included in the study and attributed a number between 1 and 100 life stress units, which were then all added together to predict whether the person was in danger of falling ill due, apparently, to stress. Question. What would be the total life stress score of a gamer who had to move to find a new group where they ate more healthfully after his group abandoned their old game due to a new rule set? Martin Roth Russ.
Ooh, 9.9 out of 10.
So that would be 99.
Yes, it would.
John Nemaya Norbert.
95.
Well, you're both very close, but sadly that means you're still both very wrong. 111. Unless assuming he found a similar job, that would apparently equate to the death of a spouse. The soft sciences. Issue number 4. Once again, as we come face to face with a new edition of Warmachine, we are shown an intriguing approach to the entire corpus of fluff behind the game. Where most games before Privateer Press's flagship effort found themselves relatively frozen in time and space, changing only units, models, and rules along the way, Privateer Press has once again surged their timeline forward, blazing the trail for many of the other younger gamer companies to continue to follow. Question. Precisely how much time passed before Games Workshop advanced the timeline of their flagship game, Warhammer, with the launch of the world-ending Age of Sigmar? The Great Rook Russ.
30 years.
Neferata Norbert.
Another 40,000. Oh,
Ooh, look at you getting all clever. Well, If we count from 1983, the first publishing of the actual first Warhammer game, it would be 32 years before they advance their timeline, which would make Russ close. However, to be completely arbitrary and unfair and move the goalposts even further, we're going to start from 1978, the first printing of Rick Priestley's Reaper, which is seen as the direct predecessor. Then it would be 37 years, which sounds even more ludicrous, so we're going to go with that, which makes Russ wrong.
Oh,
That's
man.
it for now. Thanks for listening, and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by Lone Wolf Development. Take your game to the next level.
And by Geek Nation Tours. Rise up and join the Geek Nation, touring the world at geeknationtours.com.
And by Audible. Try the service, get a free book, and support the show. All by visiting audibletrial.com/D6G.
Hello.
Hey, and welcome to episode 192, Craig,
Now that's got gravitas, Russ.
of the D6 Generation. I'm Russ Wakeman.
Gravitas. I'm Craig Gallant.
And I'm Norbert Brunhuber.
Hey, Norbert! Norbert is back on the show. You know, Norbert, I think you need a title.
Oh, gosh.
You do need a title for everybody to understand how committed you are to the Warmachine and Hordes universe. Now, I know that Menoth John is the president for life of Warmachine. I think we all know that. However, I've heard there's been a recent vacancy in prime ministerships. So I think you should be you should be the prime
Russ.
minister of Hordes.
Naughty, Russ.
You should be the prime minister of Hordes. Does that sound right to you?
Okay, I will take it.
Yes.
Regardless of certain geopolitical
And it is
events.
for life. It is also, you have now been dubbed prime minister of Hordes for life.
Now we just have to hope that Hordes doesn't horde skit.
Oh,
Yes.
Too
Wow.
soon.
Yes. Too
so
soon.
easy from across the
It is.
If you were still in New Jersey, you'd be joining in.
We have our own political issues. We're just glad the rest of the world's not looking at us for the moment. Anyway.
exactly.
Put the heat off us.
Anywho, enough about geopolitical politics. And let's move on to what we're really here to talk about, since we do have the prime minister of Hordes here. We thought it would be only appropriate.
Norbert, do you even play Hordes?
Of course he does.
I used to. I just switched back to Khador with the
Yes.
new edition, but I had been playing Circle before that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
Circle, and of course you also play Khador, and of course you also so Warmachine and Hordes. You are like the dude over there in Europe, pretty much. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do play a lot, and I organize a lot of events and things like that. So
indeed.
I've been helping build the community while I've been over here.
So we thought, and Warmachine, air quotes, Mark III, the newest edition here, has been out for what, just about 3 weeks now? A little over 3 weeks? And
2, and actually doesn't technically release until 2 days from now.
it's not even out yet. So just to level set, how many games have you played so far, Norbert? In 2 weeks.
Officially, I played 6 games.
See, that's how committed
And
he is.
that's him cutting it back.
6 games. He's not counting a few, and those are probably all competitive. But anyway, so we thought that'd be great. So Norbert, we're going to talk a lot today about Warmachine and Hordes. What's changed in the meta? What are the new models like? And of course, a deep dive into the rules, how it's changed, what we think of it, and all that good stuff. But first, we have a few other things to take care of. Number one, Craig, we have a little event going on at Gen Con, you know. I don't know if you're aware of this. We do.
Oh, okay.
We are running an event at Gen Con, as Craig well knows. It is going to be the D6 Generation Play by Mob. We've been doing this now for years, more years than I really care to remember, honestly.
It's a lot of years.
Yes. So if you'd like to join in on that action, make sure you head over to gencon.com, right? And then go to Find Events, and then type in the D6 Generation, and you will find it right there. And you can register for it. We still got plenty of seats left. We got hundreds. I think 120 people, room for 120 people. We do have to charge a couple bucks this year because Gen Con's pretty much making everybody, or at least requesting everybody charge. So we're doing a little charge there for that. But it's a small price to pay to come in, say hello, and participate in our crazy Play by Mob event. Be a part of the show. Be in Rapid Fire. Be in Achievements in Gaming, and some yet to be determined random sort of mob-like gaming experience. And if you listen to past shows, you'll know all the wackiness that ensues there, right?
Right.
So in addition to all that, of course, also we have the Lost Chapters. And Norbert, we caught up with you, Norbert, somehow you were here in Dunkin' Donuts.
I just couldn't resist. We don't have them here.
Yeah.
It's been awful.
Right. So do you remember what we talked about? We bumped into you at Dunks?
Yes. Talked a really interesting topic, which was just, what is this phenomenon about putting out a new edition for games? Is that something that we like? Is it something that's necessary? And how is it different from one gaming genre to another?
Exactly. I thought it was a pretty good topic, actually, and I think it was a great conversation. And Craig, if someone wants to listen to all that crazy conversation, how do they go about it?
Well, the best way that we would prefer, Russ, would be to become a backer at Patreon, become a patron over at patreon.com. And you can either go over there and look for the D6 Generation in their search engine, or you can go to the d6generation.com and you will find a cutesy little link right there on is it the right-hand margin, Russ?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes. You click on that, it'll bring you right to our page. You watch our little video, you'll see what it's all about. If you donate, excuse me, first it goes to healthcare. No. If you donate $2 an episode or more, and of course you will only be charged once a month at the end of the month, you will have access to the entire library of lost chapters. It's like Netflix. You immediately become are given access to all of them. And we'll talk about. We have a new goal and we have a new enticement, but we'll talk about that sometime in the near future.
Exactly.
Ooh,
yes.
Foreshadowing.
Exactly right. So, what's the time now for Craig?
Achievements in gaming.
Bloop. Well, you threw me off so much. I didn't even have the achievement noise ready. I'm not even sure what the laughter was all about.
Sorry, I was muted.
Excellent. So let's see here. So let's see if I get my achievement noise to work here, Norbert. Hang on a second here.
Yeah, because I'm hanging up.
Oh.
That's not working.
There we go.
Sorry.
There it is. I'll give him 2 here. So, Norbert, here's another one. I don't want you to have a bad experience here. There we go.
Okay.
Woo, man.
So,
because look, I'm up darn early. I think I need a little achievement.
You
for
need that little achievement. And, of course, achievements is brought to us by all of our fine friends over at Patreon or those who support us still on Libsyn, like our good friend Norbert here.
That's true. Let's not forget those guys over on Libsyn, including Norbert.
Yeah, so thank you so much for
We don't want Norbert to feel left out.
all your years of support.
Certainly don't want Norbert to feel like a leper.
No, we don't. So head
or
over.
anybody else on Libsyn.
Yes, thank you very much.
We don't want that term to become a thing.
How does he find the way to talk without coughing at this part of the show, Norbert? That's what
I don't know. You know what it is? I go on a roll.
I guess so. So
Directly
anyway,
tied to my emotions.
thank you for all that support. So, Norbert, as our guest and Prime Minister of Hordes, please go ahead. What have you been playing lately?
Lots of Warmachine and Hordes.
Yeah,
Big
right.
shocker. Yeah, so the big news is that I was actually at the Lock and Load Outpost convention, which was being held in Germany, in Frankfurt.
Yeah. Now, when was that? That was early in June, right?
Yeah, June, 12th, 13th, was it?
Yeah,
Or
right.
no, 11 and 12th, June 11, 12th. So
Right.
a couple weeks ago, a little more than 2 weeks ago. And so, Privateer Press, they run their own convention called Lock and Load out in Seattle, where they have all things Privateer Press going on. And last year, Germany held the first one outside of Seattle in Frankfurt. And this year, there were actually 3 of them being held in Europe, one in the UK, one in Paris, and one in Frankfurt. So I was in the German one again. So it was great. Played loads of games there. During it was 3 days actually, so we played loads of games there, kind of on the sly actually, because the cards and things got leaked ahead of time, so we were playing casually some Mark III, and then on Sunday, once it officially released, I actually got to play in the first tournament for Mark III, because one of the press gangers kind of just threw a tournament together for us to play on Sunday, so that was really fun to
Nice.
say that I did that.
Achievement for that?
Yeah, and then since then, once I got back home to London, I've been playing at the local club some Warmachine games, which has been really great. And then this past Sunday, I was actually at our local store running a Mark III tournament here in London, the first one in London. So we had 24 people come down to Darksphere, which is our shop, and had a great day of playing the first Mark III tournament. So a lot of gaming, a lot of things to get excited, and a lot of things to start doing and trying to feel out how this new edition is to play.
Yeah, we're going to dive in deeper with your thoughts on the new edition a little later. But as you can clearly see, Norbert is already hip deep in the new stuff, in the new hotness. Great. Awesome, Norbert. Craig, how about yourself? What have you been playing?
Well, it's been an odd little period of time, and I got really sick, and that took away some gaming, and I went to New York, and that took away some gaming. But I have played a couple weeks ago, because our schedule's all messed up also. I played the new Project Z by Warlord Games with old Andy from the Nerd Herders. And Andy really bent over backwards to make that schedule work for me, because I wanted to play a game, but I also wanted to go see the Warcraft movie, and I only had one night to do it, and he made that work for me. So thank you, Andy. And yeah, it was pretty good. It was actually better than I thought it was going to be when I first opened the box. And that gets you a whole bunch of minis. It gets you like 10 male survivors, and I think a small biker gang with 2 bikes, and then a bunch of different mini zombies. And the rules are very light. They're like 7 or 8 pages total. Comes with some nice card stock tokens. And I really kind of had the feel going into it like, wow, there's not a lot here. But then it's actually a miniatures game. It's not like, oh, here's everything you need to play an entire zombie apocalypse. What they want you to do is they want you to go buy more zombie boxes, more boxes of more survivors, like the female survivors, the biker gang. There's a military unit box. And every one of those boxes comes with more cards, because the game is very card driven in that you've got equipment that you can find. You've also got all of your units are in cards, and that's how they do the points. That the cards are balanced against each other. So your game is a certain number of cards per side. And so what you get is basically 2 sides plus the zombies and the cards to play those 2 sides. So if you want to expand beyond that, you're going to have to get expansions. It's not like, here's our cool zombie game, and then you can use whatever models you want. You really are going to need to keep up with this, more like a miniatures game. So once I figured out what was going on, I actually had a lot of fun with the game. It's a very light game. It's very beer and pretzels, but it was a lot of fun. So that was cool. And then I had a little hiatus. And then last week, Russ and I had a Warmachine game, which I think we'll probably talk about more a little bit later.
Yes, we will.
Woo-hoo.
Very cool.
Russ playing Warmachine. Let's say Craig playing Warmachine again.
I played Warmachine. Yes, my retribution of Skyra forces made it back to the table, and it was pretty cool, and I enjoyed myself. And then I played, what did I play, Russ? Animals on Board?
Yes, you did.
I did.
You did play Animals on Board.
I played Animals on Board with Russ and Kit.
Yeah, so that's a good segue into my stuff. So yes, my brother had his semi-annual.
No, he didn't. Don't even
not
say the words.
My brother had a gathering.
He had his Captain America red, white, and blue themed party that had nothing to do with 4th of July.
Nor was it on the 4th of July. So,
well, it wasn't even close.
No. And we did play a couple of large games there. First of all, we played Animals on Board. My daughter, Kit, and Craig and I played Animals on Board, which is, I actually played quite a few Animals on Board. That was my 4th game, Craig, of Animals on Board.
Was it really?
Yeah, and it's very fun and fast. Essentially, each player has a little arc that you build out of cardboard. This is from our friends at Stronghold Games. And it comes with a bunch of tiles that these tiles are all different animals. And the trick is that each player is trying to collect sets of tiles for their arc. But the trick is that some guy named Noah's got dibs on all pairs of animals. So if you end the game with any animal pairs, you lose them. Noah takes them. But if you end the game with one animal, you score the points on the tile. But if you end the game with a set of animals, again, not 2, but 3 or more, each animal is worth 5 points. So that's the big deal. But the way the sets are taken from the table adds to the strategy, and they're splitting, and you can screw your opponents. It's kind of like a faster playing Zooloretto. If you're familiar with Zooloretto, you might like Animals on Board. It's a lighter, faster version of that. So we really enjoyed that, and the artwork's very cute. So if you have kids who like animals, that's a good one.
It was fun.
Also played Dead Last with the entire posse there. So about 10 people. It handles up to 12. Dead Last is the new hotness from our friends at Smirk and Dagger. And this is a really interesting game. So the game comes with a bunch of cards, and the premise is each person is playing sort of a gang member. And you each have a little card in front of you that's a color, and it's got little artwork of a person. One's wielding a sword, one's got an Uzi, one's got a shotgun, right? And you're all like fighting. And each person's got a hand of cards, and in this hand of cards is all the other player colors at the table. And so basically what happens is everybody looks at each other, and you try to communicate in some kind of subtle way and get everybody to vote for one person to be dead.
Yes.
That's hopefully not you. And so if you all agree to this, then you put your card face down to the person you want to kill. So if we think purple needs to die, everybody puts their cards down. You flip all the cards over, And if purple got the most votes, purple is dead. But here's the rub. Anybody who didn't vote for purple is also dead. So not only do you not want to be the person who gets voted for, but you also want to be in the majority of people who vote. Now here's the nuance. It would be very easy for everybody at the table to just go, hey, let's kill purple. Everybody in favor? Okay, we're killing purple. Except if purple knows they're going to die, purple, instead of voting for somebody else, can play, there's one other card in your hand called the ambush card. Purple can put face down the ambush card. Now in reveal all cards, if the person with the most votes is purple, and purple happened to play the ambush card, instead of purple dying, purple can pick one person who voted for her to die instead. And the thing is, though, if you play the ambush card and you did not get the most votes, you die. So it's really a game of group dynamics and really understanding. And it really turned into very quickly the left side of the table against the right side of the table. And it was kind of like they killed one of ours, we killed one of theirs, and it went back and forth. And then you got some nuance to it. It was actually surprisingly, the dynamics got really going really quickly. And basically after you go through several rounds and the sole survivor or the pair of survivors gets to divvy up some loot tokens in the middle of the board, and you play multiple rounds. So you do die a lot, but you're back into the game almost instantly, so you're not out very long. It's a fun social game, plays up to 12 players. Really enjoyed this one. I could definitely play that a few more times. That was a lot of fun. As Craig mentioned, I have played Mark III now twice. I played once versus Craig, and I played once versus my daughter. And I made the mistake of, Norbert, you'll like this, I made the mistake of quickly reading Kaya's new Spirit Door power.
Classic mistake,
and thinking, oh, this power has been nerfed. I don't need to worry about that anymore. And then in the middle of the game, she read it twice. She goes, oh, I don't think this is as bad as my dad thinks. And all of a sudden, wham, bam, oh my God, I'm dead in the dirt. It was kind of awesome, actually. She was brilliant with it. So we'll talk more about that in the Warmachine section. But yes, Warmachine is awesome as ever. But we'll talk more about that.
Cool.
Also playing some other fast and fun games here. Pirate Tunes is so Pirate Tunes is another game from Stronghold. It has basically you start the game with the front and the back of a pirate ship, and in the middle of the board is this funky little chest thing. That inside of that goes essentially a selection of tokens, and some of these things will be the middle of your ship to help your ship grow, and some of these things will be crew members that pop up in different spots of your ship, or maybe they're sails you add to the top of your ship. And so as you play the game, you have sort of this cool ship that's growing in front of you. But the deal with the game is by the end of the game, you want to build a ship in a certain way with certain combinations of things to score the most points. And it's kind of like a fast-playing Galaxy Trucker. You have that feeling of building something. And there's also this real-time feeling of trying to grab the stuff in the middle. But instead of just randomly grabbing stuff, you're actually placing meeples carefully on top of things and trying to be the guy with the most meeples on that piece of ship you want the most. Really neat little game. Very fun. Also, a couple of these games that Stronghold's done recently, Animals on Board and Pirate Tunes, very simple, very fun, and very, very easy to teach, which are the kind of games I like, especially in a sort of a social setting where you're not really... No one's there for a super heavy game. They're just there for a quick fun game. You know, good for the grandparents, the young kids, the aunt or uncle who are visiting, that kind of stuff. Both these games are great for that.
Cool.
Also played Bear Valley. This is another one from Stronghold Games. This would not fall into the easy to teach category. But it was pretty neat. You're basically playing explorers trying to make their way through the forest and not get eaten by a bear, essentially, is what's happening there. Because, you know, as you might expect, there are bears in the valley. Pretty neat, tile laying game. The rules, though, are a little, finicky. I would definitely watch a video of how to play the game. It's one of those games it's easier to watch someone else teach it to you than to read the rule book. There's a lot of, I don't know.
I love that new trend, that trend of showing a game on video.
The video definitely helps. Yeah, just watch the video. You'll be fine.
Nice.
And then also I played level 7 Omega Protocol as the Overseer again. We are on the Kronos mission. My group has been stuck there now. They have lost again to Kronos. So another victory for the Overseer. So now I have painted Kronos and I put a picture up on our little Facebook page that says, you failed twice. Do you really want to see me again? And of course they do. So we'll be doing that again next week. We'll see how it goes, but I'm having a lot of fun with Omega Protocol and I'm really thankful to have a group that doesn't quit just because they have a rough game. So that's really nice.
Yeah. Did you play another game at the top there? I'm interested in that one.
Oh, yes. I forgot to mention World of Yo-Ho, Norbert. Good eye. Have you heard of it?
How could I not miss that name? Come on.
This game is crazy. And Craig, this kind of goes into rapid fire where you're mentioning the melding of games and tech.
Oh, yes.
World
I didn't
of-
do that, but Geekly McNerdigan certainly did.
World of Yoho, okay, is got this giant board. It's like 4x4. Maybe it's not quite, maybe 3x3. It's big.
Really?
And it unfolds on the table, and it's this beautiful artwork of an archipelago. So there's all these little islands. But here's the thing. Everybody takes out their cell phone, okay? And the board is divided up into rectangles. And the rectangles, surprisingly enough, are just big enough to put a cell phone in it. So what you do is everybody downloads the app called World of Yoho, and everybody turns it on, and if you're on the same Wi-Fi network, they all link up really simple. It works actually very reliably. And you're asked to pick a pirate captain. You can choose one of four, and they're all very whimsical captains, like there's a parrot and a shark and everything else. Then you also pick a ship, and so the theme of these ships are very fantasy, so they're kind of like, one of these is like a ship on the back of a giant turtle, and one of them's on the ship of the back of a whale, and things like that. So you pick your ship, and your captain of your ship gives you special abilities. And then it says, place your cell phone in space A2. And you place your cell phone space up in that space, and all of a sudden your cell phone screen turns into the exact artwork of the board behind it. So when you place it down, you're looking through your phone onto the board, but then an animated ship appears on the board. And what you do is when it's your turn to move, you slide your cell phone from space A2 to A3, let's say, and the background image slides at the same rate you move the phone, so it looks like you're sliding almost a magnifying glass across the board. And as you do so, your ship sails to the next space. And if our two phones get next to each other, so if my phone's next to Craig's phone, I can see Craig's ship on his phone, and he can see my ship on my phone, because remember, the phones are face up on the table. And all of a sudden, when it's Craig's turn, a little tack button appears next to my ship on my phone, and Craig can tap my phone, like he's tapping the board, and initiate an attack action against my ship. And then what happens is we both pick up our phones, and we each displayed a hand of sort of cards, essentially, and we can do stuff on our phones in private. We do the battle that says, okay, replace your phones back in their squares, and it tells you where to put them again, and then you watch the battle unfold on the phones.
Wow.
Really sort of interesting. And then sometimes you'll move around the board, and all of a sudden you'll go into a space and an animated sea monster will attack you, almost like imagine you're playing a board game and you're drawing a card like an event card every time, but you don't see that. You're just moving your phone, all of a sudden like a sea monster will animate on your phone, and it's to deal with fighting a sea monster. Or there'll be a bottle floating in the water, and you can tap it to get a mission to go do something.
So is the game just the map and the rule book?
The game included in the box is the map, the rule book, and these little suction cup things, rubber creature suction cups that match your captain and your boat that you can suction cup to your phone. So you can see that you have the shark, whale boat thing. But really, you're right. All you need in the game box is essentially the board. My daughter and I, as we played this now twice, we both said the exact same thing. We really, really want to like this game because the execution of the animation and the phones is so beautifully done, and the art is and there's so subtle stuff, like when you're moving your phone and thinking about your turn, you're hearing the sea noises in your phone, like ding, ding, the dingies and the birds. And then when it's Kit's turn, her phone all of a sudden goes, her captain makes a noise like, oh, yo ho! And you'll hear the noise, and you immediately can't help but look to her phone because your ears hear the sound, and you immediately know it's that phone, that ship's turn over there, and she goes so there's a lot about it that's really, really cool, and the phones actually integrate pretty well. The problem with it is that fundamentally the game is dull. So it's really just sail around the board and pick up and deliver stuff. And fighting each other, while there's some missions for that, it's kind of like, it's almost, Craig, like Merchants and Marauders, very light. It's like light. And they didn't take advantage of the fact they had these super powerful cell phones that could be doing all kinds of cool calculations and really deep combat. The combat system is trivially simple. And it's a shame because I feel like they could have leveraged that and made a really intricate, awesome combat system that had a very simple interface, but instead it's a trivial combat system with a trivial interface, and it's really just pick up and deliver, but in a very boring way. But for the first 15 minutes or so, you're enthralled with how integrated the technology is with the game board. It's a really great concept, and I think they just failed on the game core itself, the part that matters most.
Yeah, it sounds like a good proof of principle, but it needs development.
Yeah. Someone could look at this and see how this is done and make a better version of it in space or something. It could be
who makes it?
Aiello, actually. Aiello, pretty well-known company. Yeah. The artwork's beautiful, the animation's beautiful, the sound effects are awesome. There's a lot to like, except that the game itself is dull. That's the only problem with it.
Yeah. Cool.
But anyway, I did. I'm glad I got it and played it because it's a very unique experience. And I'm going to carry it around some other games and see if I can get someone to like it. But it's one of those games that's really easy to teach. But again, unfortunately, it kind of outstays its welcome after like 4 turns.
Well,
all right.
Hopefully it goes into a new edition.
Yeah, that's all it takes. A new edition, right, Norbert? Well done there. So, Norbert, what about modeling? Speaking of new editions, what are you building lately?
Oh, well, I was so inspired by the new edition promising to have more warjacks on the table and doing stuff, which has always been like the big deal about Warmachine, is having these kind of marquee models going on the table, that I went back to my case and kind of looked at all the warjacks that I haven't been using for ages that have been sitting there all primed up, and I said, I'm going to paint these guys. So I've been actually really busy. So I have 4 warjacks on my table.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely a lot. I tend to do things in kind of a line, like a line manufacturing type format. So it didn't bother me, but it is a lot of work. Especially red. Base coating red is like soul crushing sometimes.
Do you prime white?
So,
Norbert,
what's that?
Do you prime white to make the red painting easier, or what do you do?
No, I still prime black, but I've tried to mitigate it by first painting it, like sloppily painting it with a medium brown color, to like a reddish brown kind of color, to kind of be covering the primer, but then not still keep it the dark color that I like before putting the red on it. And that didn't work. It worked to a degree, but still not well enough. So I think I'm going to finally break down and try the army painter route, where you prime the model in the color. So we'll see. I'm a little concerned about the way the primer behaves in terms of how you paint on it afterwards. So, but we'll see. Maybe I'll try one model with it.
I've heard the other option is the other option is airbrushing. I've heard.
Oh yeah, that'd be great, but that's not going to happen in my little flat. So
seems like a lot of work. Right.
But yes, I would airbrush probably before anything else. Yeah. So I have a Torch on the table, a Grolar, a Demolisher, and Black Ivan. So all those jacks.
Nice.
And they're nearly done. They just need basing now. I'm really pleased.
Very cool.
And then lastly, I also have a battle mechanic officer who's like a little mini warjack, actually. And so he's been painted alongside the bigger ones.
Very cool. You really are embracing the whole warjack thing. Nice.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I bought Futures.
What about you, Craig? What have you been modeling?
Well, I finally finished up I'm still finishing up. There's one last thing I want to do with my arena for Arena Rex, but I really wanted to theme it up with lions, and so I found a bunch of really cool lion bits from Cybor at the War Store. They're all like supposed to be for Warhammer 40,000. So there's like cool armor plates, and there's shoulder pads, but the entire shoulder pad is a lion head. So and cool giant shields that are lion heads. So I got those and I painted them all up, and it was sort of a mini hobby coma because I came out of it and my arena is now festooned with lion heads, and I don't have any memory of when I put them all on.
Wow.
So, but it's really cool. It really kind of knocked it all up another notch. And at the same time, I am painting more gladiators for Arena Rex. I'm trying to get, I've got 6 Ludus Magnus. So they're sort of classic, excuse me. They're sort of classic gladiator poses and looking guys. And then I have 6 Morituri, which are the Egyptian looking guys. They're all very cool. And then I can't remember his name, but there's a slave that can be used by any faction. So he's actually got no armor at all. He's fighting in a loincloth with a wooden shield. And he is the quintessential glass cannon. He's got almost no defense whatsoever. If you hit him, he'll die almost immediately. But if he gets one shot in, he can one shot kill almost anything in the game.
Oh.
So if you can like kind of manipulate and keep people away from him until he gets a really good turn where he can charge in and get 1 or 2 attacks, then he's really going to pay for himself and then get killed. But they're all very cool models to paint. Again, very, very, very fiddly. It's clear that more than one sculptor made these models, because some of them are really cool and dynamic and only a few pieces and they go together great, and then others are really cool and dynamic and wow, there's a million pieces, and like the Egyptian beard on one guy is a separate piece. And I feel like I'm doing the original run of the Malifaux plastics, remember, where like people's heads were cut in half and things like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some of the Arena Rex models are that fiddly. I'm never going to forget the tiny little Egyptian beard that came separately, and that didn't last the initial dry brushing. So that was frustrating. But the models look beautiful. They're almost all done, and then it'll be really fun with Arena Rex with a lot more models and a lot more variety. And that's what I've been doing.
Nice.
That arena looks amazing. I saw it on Twitter, Craig. Really
Thank
cool.
you.
Yeah,
I'm very happy with the way that came out.
I bet.
Very jaw-dropping in person, Norbert. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, I bet.
Who knew Playmobil makes a great arena for Michigan?
That's right. Almost perfect right out of the box.
Right. So, Craig, you'll like this. So and Norbert, you'll like this too. So I was watching Painting with Menoth John the other day.
Right.
And I noticed he was talking about the new Privateer Press plastics and how, people were asking him what about how much flashing are they, how do you remove it? And I don't think it was him, was co-host. Do you know his co-host's name, Norbert? I feel embarrassed.
John.
John, yes. So John mentioned, well, if you tried a seam scraper. And I'm like, and he's like, no, but I'll check one. And I'm like, what the hell's a seam scraper? So I went online and Googled it, and sure enough, there's such a thing as a seam scraper, which is a small tool, looks like a dental implement, not unlike the tools, Craig, you use to work with green stuff, but the ends of it are curved in a certain way. So I ordered one because it was like, $3. And, so far I'm really liking it. It's a great way to sort of clean up, seams on plastics and like little bits of flashing on plastic. And I find it to be easier than trying to get an X-Acto in there, in certain spots.
Yeah, so that's what I saw it in the past. I saw it, and I'm looking at it, and it looked just like an X-Acto blade. So I didn't understand
really.
what
it's sort of like, so an X-Acto blade, right? You know what X-Acto blade looks like? You can imagine like a super small snow shovel that's curved down, right? So you can get in from the side better, because an X-Acto is sort of gets wide quick, narrow from the edge, and so there's certain places where the seam scraper seems to work better for me. So I don't know. I mean, you probably don't absolutely need one, but I'm finding it amusing. I'm finding it useful. So,
but is it like a sharp blade, like an X-Acto?
No, it's not
just
sharp.
Shaped
like
differently?
It's got a nice thin edge, but it's not sharp. Like you wouldn't cut yourself on it.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't dig into the plastic either. Maybe a little
exactly.
easier to use
if you slip with it, you probably won't ding your model. Right.
Huh. Okay.
Especially with the softer board game I'm liking it on the softer board game plastics too. It's a really good way to clean up some of those without getting cutting up your models too much also. So so I'm liking it. It's a nice extra tool in my kit. So speaking of board games, was actually using the seam scraper on my Battlelore bits. So my youngest daughter has been having a fun time. She's been getting into board games with me. So a lot. So we've been breaking out new games. And we broke out Battlelore this past weekend, and we're going to play it, but then I discovered that my new edition of Battlelore had some broken bits. So we went through and we cleaned some models up, glued them back together, got that all cleaned up. And then also for level 7, I painted Kronos. I figured since he'd had 2 victories in a row, he deserved a good paint job, so I painted up and put a picture of him up on Twitter to taunt my players. So he's ready to rock also. And then now my older daughter and I are lining up our models, Norbert, for Warmachine, what to paint next. The biggest problem we found, and we'll talk more about this later, but I don't know if you noticed this, but some of the solos now come in 3-packs. Have you noticed this?
No, yeah, I saw that in the notes, and I didn't understand what you meant.
So, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but the storm callers, or the storm smiths, right, the guys that call the lightning down for Signar, they're 5 points for 3. You can't buy 1. You have to buy 3.
You mean buy as in like physically purchase?
I mean as like take them on an army list. They're 5 points. You can't take one storm.
Okay, I see what
you know what I mean? And there's a wolf in Circle of Oberos that is just a wolf, and it doesn't do much. It's good for grabbing objectives and stuff. And it also now is 5 points for 3 of them. And so she has the same problem I do, where I had only ever painted 1 Stormcaller, and so now I have 2 more. I just got to paint them. And she only has 1 of these wolves, so to be able to field her wolf now, she's got to get 2 more. So we're going through a list finding that kind of stuff. Unless I'm reading something wrong, but that's what the card says on it. And the card actually has like 5 points. It says 3 models, and it has 3. It still says solo on the top, so they still must run as solos. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you run into this in Kador.
I haven't actually, but in Kador. But I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah, take a look at some of the solo cards and see if you see some that say 3 or have multiple wound tracks on them or something like that.
Right. Okay.
All right. Let's see what else. Oh, other. So Norbert. Well, if Norbert's looking things up, Craig, why don't you go first? What have you been doing in the world of movies and books and stuff, Greg?
In the world of movies and books. Well, while I've been sick, I've taken full advantage to try to clear my DVR. And I watched all of The Blacklist. And I won't do any spoilers, but The Blacklist has a huge event that happens at the probably five or six episodes away from the end of the season. And it was like, oh my God, are they really going to do that? And it was really weird the way everything resolved, but it was really cool right up until the end. So that was cool.
I watched that series too. I like it too. Yeah, it was pretty intense.
Were you satisfied or unsatisfied with the resolution at the end?
Of the whole season, you mean?
Of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that in general, after the big, it was interesting because like something that you would expect to be the end of the season happened like sort of in the middle,
right?
Because of the actress in real life, and then so I didn't know where they were going to go with the series altogether. So I thought I was going to give them a little time to kind of get their legs underneath them again, and then the real ending happened, and it's just like. Whoa, what's going on? Not that it was like so like mind bending. It's just like now you just don't know what the writers are going to actually go, what direction they're going to go come the new season.
Yeah. It's one of those things where they've completely changed what the show's going to be come next season.
Yeah.
Again, because they did that 2 seasons ago. Yeah, so it was interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. Fear the Walking Dead. I cleared that, and that was okay. It's not great, but I still enjoy it, so I'm still watching that. And then The Last Ship just started, and I'm still intrigued by how they can call this The Last Ship and say anything about the novel in the opening credit. I mean, the guy he must be getting money, so that's good. But yeah, so I'm intrigued, and it's neat, and I am enjoying it. It has absolutely nothing to do with the book whatsoever. Well, I feel even less now that into the second season. But
have you seen the show?
But it's fun.
Have you seen the show Last Man on Earth?
I started and then stopped.
So I feel like that show has the same problem with its own title.
Right, because there's a bunch of other people.
Because there's clearly, not a spoiler, because you can see it from the previews, there's clearly more than one Last Man on Earth, and women too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Anywho, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. With the Discworld novels, I changed my tack a little bit, and I'm not reading all of them right now. My favorite character by far is Sam Vines, commander of the City Watch. And so the magic of the internet, you can just go online and somebody's come up with a list of everything. So I found a list of all of the books in chronological order that feature him as the main character, and I'm reading all those. And I just finished what did I just finish? I can't remember. He's a diplomat. It was awesome. I love it. Those books are still amazing. In the summer, my audiobook listening goes way down because I don't have a commute. I only listen when I'm mowing the lawn, really. And so I'm still listening to Brandon Sanderson's Well of Ascension, Mistborn Book 2, and I'm still enjoying that. And did you ever know what? Yes?
Do you find yourself taking a few extra laps when you're on the lawnmower?
Yes, I have been known to stretch it a little bit, yes. If I'm in a good part, yep. And then my Did You Ever Notice is going to be about my writing over the past 6 months. So that's been kind of a thing recently. But a big thanks to Adam Harder, another listener who emailed me with some very, very, very more than kind words about my book, Legacy of Shadow, which is available now on Amazon. Or from the publisher as an ebook. Actually, I think you can get it as an ebook from Amazon also. And so please give that a try. If the blurbs are all weird, and the blurb on Amazon was still the spoiler-filled, wrong information-filled, weird. I think what happened was my pitch note from the very beginning, like from 3 years ago, somehow got put in the wrong folder, and they sent that to Amazon. So my pitch note, which is basically the entire story written out with a lot of stuff that didn't get put in the end and a lot of stuff that got changed, got put up as the Amazon blurb for some reason. So that's weird in and of itself. But that has since, by the time you're listening to this, it should have been taken down, replaced with a very vague, generic blurb that I wrote today to try to I probably swung the pendulum too far in the other direction. But anyway, I just wanted to say a quick thanks to Adam for his kind words. and just ask, hey, get out there. And you know what? Amazon reviews and Goodreads reviews are hugely important at this point in my career. So if you read the book, if you like the book, write a review. If you didn't write it, go read another book. It'll be awesome. That's about all I got. Thank you. Okay, now Norbert.
Okay. It's interesting about the synopsis. Now I can't get that out of my mind because I read the synopsis because when we get to, I might as well get into reading. It's on deck. I purchased the book, but I purchased it based on the synopsis. And but it was. This is I'm buying it from the UK store now. Don't forget from Amazon. Okay. Yep. And it was a normal synopsis. It gave you enough information while not giving away the whole plot. So
good. Okay.
Yeah. So now I got curious.
Well, if it didn't give you enough away and you liked it enough to, then thank you for that, and thank you for your support. And I hope you like the book.
No, I've been waiting years because you've been honing your craft on all these other type of writing projects, and I said I'm going to give that a miss. I'm going to give that a miss because just wasn't my interest. And then I said, but he's moving into something. He's going to get to his own book at some point. I can feel it, and sure enough, there it is. So yeah, it's really cool. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
I didn't know if it was really going to happen. Meaning, like I hadn't heard from you in a while about it on the show, anyway, and. Didn't know if you're finally going to be able to take the plunge on it, but you have, so great.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, it's weird because of the way everything works. It was written over a year ago, and then it just sort of goes into the process and disappears into the machine, and so I stopped talking about it. So that's what happened.
Can I ask you? These days people self-publish quite a bit. Is that something you had considered or?
No, I never considered it because but by the time I was thinking about writing an actual book, it was because somebody was asking me to write it for money. So I think,
it
wasn't like it's not a king's ransom, but it was very nice and it was very generous and it was certainly not a small amount. I'm not walking away from my job or anything, but it was a very nice offer. And I don't I'm sure there's a reason. Somewhere along the lines of hello.
Yes, you're here.
Yeah,
hello.
I'm here, but I'm very confused.
Is it me you're looking for?
What?
Is it me you're looking for? Hello.
No, I just heard some bleeps and bloops, and the last time I heard that, we had completely lost contact with everybody.
Nope.
Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, I'm sure there's reasons. Like some people are like super in control of their own IPs and their own ideas and. But it takes a lot more time and effort, and it was really nice just having somebody who was willing to take that step with me. So I didn't ever think about self-publishing.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you in that case.
I'm too much of a traditionalist.
Yeah. Okay. Other reading. I'm just going to start that actually because what I have been reading is there's been a whole slew of Warmachine novels that have been coming out through their Skull Island Expeditions imprint.
Yeah.
So I read The Malcontents, which is kind of a standalone series. They had a sequel called Into the Wild that I finished. And then they had a small novella called Wrath of the Dragonfather that I've read, which helped progress the fiction of the game a little bit. And then what I'm just wrapping up now is The Blood of Kings, which is another fictional element that kind of moves the story arc forward. And that's actually the first full-length novel that their lead writer, Doug Seacat at Privateer Press, has written. So it's been really interesting.
Now, which of the books have you enjoyed the most? Have you found them all to be great? Are there some you like more than others? You know what I mean?
No. I find them all about the same. I mean, I like the world a lot, so it's just fun to be in the world.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Although Wrath of the Dragonfather actually was pretty interesting. Because it's really gotten the dragons involved, which are really rare in the world. So it's been interesting to see the humans interacting with those dragons and how that's been going on. So that's been actually pretty interesting.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So then, I haven't watched any films recently. You guys were talking about how the summer blockbusters are kind of over, and I had to agree because I don't have very much to look forward to now. World of Warcraft kind of came out, but I gave it a miss. So no films recently, which is kind of a bummer because I love going to see films. But I have been watching some television. Game of Thrones, of course, been watching that, and Gotham is the other show that I've been on a geek level that I've been watching. I've been recording the Flash ones for a rainy day, so to speak, but haven't watched the new season yet.
All right. I do like Flash, and but yes, I think you are wise to choose to skip Warcraft.
Yeah.
More about that in a bit.
I didn't mind it.
Oh, okay. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
What else, Norbert? What else you got in there? Is that everything?
Yeah, that was everything.
All right, cool. Well, let's talk about Warcraft then, Craig. So I saw Warcraft.
Okay.
What did you think?
I thought it was fine. I thought, you know what? My benchmark for bad fantasy is now the Dungeons and Dragons movie with Jeremy Irons.
It was definitely better than that.
So if it beats that, then I'm like, oh, okay, not so bad.
Right.
I
the
thought it
bar
was
is low,
great.
then.
I mean, I thought it captured Warcraft, the game, great, which I thought was really neat because they had almost every battle scene had a high level over the battlefield aerial view, which was really cool.
Yeah, that was cool.
Almost immediately I was like, oh, cool. This isn't World of Warcraft. It's Warcraft. So that's okay.
Yeah.
That was my own personal
Yeah, it was
take
actually
on the whole
Warcraft Orcs versus Humans. It was like the old game.
thing. Exactly.
Right.
I thought the plot was actually kind of unique and interesting. What really kind of made me less satisfied with it was that it was such a sequel setup and not a standalone plot.
Mm-hmm.
I found that to be frustrating and annoying.
Yeah.
Other than that, I thought the acting was good. The special effects were amazing, which is huge nowadays because you can do a lot of computer special effects and just take away from your movie. Transformers, I'm looking at you. But I thought they did a great job with the special effects, and most of the acting I thought was very impressive for its genre. Nobody's going to be nominated for anything, but it was good. I thought it was cool. Where did it fall short for you, Russ?
I wanted more. I wanted more heroism. Like I didn't feel like, I don't know. I wanted more quippy one-liners. I wanted more fun.
This was a dirty, gritty fantasy. There wasn't a lot of.
It almost took itself too seriously, and I guess I didn't want that from this film. And I thought the plot was also, unfortunately, the plot twist was so telegraphed that it wasn't. So
I think maybe you're just telepathic for plot twists.
Oh, come on! There was no plot, Craig. I mean, you knew it was going to happen. I don't want to spoil anything, but it was.
Well, you mean that? Oh, yeah. Well, that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there was no. I mean,
but that's. There's a whole bunch of stuff I didn't see coming, and you're like looking at one. I think they succeeded even greater with you because you didn't realize there were a bunch of other plot twists. Clearly.
Okay. All right. Well, anywho, I did not. I was not as, and then I thought the combat wasn't as fun as I was hoping it would be. Like the combat was sort of.
Yeah. So clearly you were thinking it was going to be a fun, silly, kind of tongue-in-cheek, sort of enough cheese for a hero sandwich.
Yeah, well, that's what the game is, right? I mean, the game is full of.
Yes, I know, with all the lines, and you're absolutely right.
Right.
But I haven't played, I played the game maybe once 100 years ago.
Right.
So I didn't go in expecting it like sort of an atmosphere.
Yeah, you're talking about a video game that has dwarves riding motorcycles. I mean, you got to kind of.
Yeah. I will 100% cede to you that atmosphere was completely missing from the movie.
Visuals were awesome. I just wish there was more. And there was the HeroScape table was amazing. I wish they were playing HeroScape on it because it looked really good.
Yeah, that's true.
It was like, oh my God, they're playing HeroScape. But yeah, there were parts I really liked. I just wish there was more action, and I wish the story was more compelling. That's all.
Well, I found the story a little too compelling, and I think that goes with what you're saying. Like it took itself too seriously.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean that it went like 180 degrees away from fun and campy.
Yeah, I mean
really.
I think Willow had better one-liners than this movie did, and that's
but this movie wasn't going for one. That's what I'm saying. This movie wasn't at all the kind of movie you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I wanted at least,
and it wasn't but it didn't set out to do that and fail.
No, right.
Which would give more credence to you. I mean, your opinion's 100% valid, and everything you're saying is true. Yeah. But I think your reaction has a lot more to do with what you brought into it and expected.
Yes.
Not that the film lacks flaws. Clearly, it does. But I think a lot that's why, because I was wondering why you and I had such vastly different experiences, and I think it's mainly because you went in expecting something, and totally valid that you should because of the canon behind it. Whereas I only tangentially knew anything about Warcraft, and mostly from watching over your shoulder in the good old days.
Right.
Yeah.
But
wow.
But yeah, so I went in without any of that expectation and anticipation.
Yeah.
So the things that were like disappointing and odd to you were kind of cool and neat, and then disappointing to me in different reasons. I think mainly because of what impact it had on the plot at the end.
I would have been happy with it if they wanted to go the Lord of the Rings route and be all serious, but even Lord of the Rings had its fun moments. You need those little...
Right. No, this movie wanted to be like the Joe Abercrombie movie.
Yeah, it did. But even that has comic relief. Like it had none.
Absolutely. Yeah, but comic relief aside, clearly they either didn't hit your comic funny bone at all.
Yeah.
Because there were a couple comic moments.
Yeah.
Where people got punched and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it did lack that conscious tongue-in-cheek or conscious enough cheese for a hero sandwich kind of thing.
Yes.
But yeah, like I think, and it was an odd choice. Now that you mention it, for them to want to be the gritty, real, nobody's safe kind of Game of Thrones-ish fantasy, considering its source material.
Right. That's
so I think that's totally valid.
All right.
I put my stamp of approval upon your opinion, Russ.
So, well, thank you. And are you going to see the sequel? Will you be in line?
I probably will, because I thought it was.
Do you think it'll make
I really
enough
want
money?
some resolution to some of these plot lines.
It's not doing well. Do you think they'll make a sequel?
No, I don't. Well, I don't know. It depends.
I mean, it's very
hard to judge who gets a sequel nowadays, because most of that money is coming from overseas.
I got to think this is an expensive movie to make, because it was definitely beautiful. It was all CGI.
But then when you're doing the CGI, now you've put that investment into the CGI.
Yeah, you're right.
So that development doesn't have to be there. So it's cheaper to make the sequel.
Yeah. So
I think the calculus behind making a sequel in Hollywood nowadays, or Vancouver, or wherever they're making the movies,
right,
is beyond me. Yeah. Like, do I think I don't. Will I see it if a sequel comes out? Probably. Do I think it deserves a sequel? Probably not. Yeah. Because it kind of took it for granted, like, look, we're so important and big, we're just going to set up a sequel.
I mean, there wasn't there was no satisfying end. That was the biggest problem. No. It was like Empire Strikes Back ending, and you can do that in your second film. You really can't do that in your first film. Right?
I think that's the taste that I was left with, was a taste of, like, they sort of assumed that they were this great big thing without proving it first. Right. So yeah. I think that was the major flaw for me. But anyway, I enjoyed it for what it was. So continue, Russ.
All right. So anyway, other quick stuff. And I got back into Quantum Break, the big Xbox One game with time travel. And the big thing about this is there are television episodes between each level of the game. So you play about a hour and a half level of the game, and then you get a half an hour television episode to watch. But what's neat about it is that the episode you see, it's actually pretty cool. So you play as the hero for a level, then you go into the bad guy's mind and you play his character, but instead of doing any kind of combat or anything, you make sort of a conscientious forked decision about how the bad guy is going to react to what you as a good guy are doing. And it's pretty interesting because you're kind of like choosing how the bad guy's plot is falling apart, which is pretty neat. And then you watch a show, but then what's really cool about it is the show you watch is based on the path you chose for the bad guy, plus little things you do into the game get injected into the show. So, for example, one small spoiler, it's really tiny. There's a part when you're playing the game and you're fighting bad guys, there's this little object you can turn on, and it's a book on tape. And it starts playing this dramatic voice of a guy reading like a fantasy book. And you can have it so your character jams this into the radio frequency of the bad guys, and they're all hearing in their headsets. And then later, when you're watching the actual television show, if you did that in the video game, you'll see the actors are like, what the hell is going on with the headsets? And they're listening to it. You can hear the same book being read. It's kind of, so like little like, just like little, Easter eggs like that are in there. It's kind of neat. Really enjoying that game though. It's a lot of fun. And the story's pretty compelling. I like sci-fi and time travel, so it's right my cup of tea. Also, the kids have rediscovered Assassin's Creed 2, the old school game from 2009 era, which is widely regarded as one of the best Assassin's Creeds. So when they like the newer ones, which they played, and they're excited about the movie coming out this fall, and so they tried out Assassin's Creed 2, which is now available very affordably, and they're really enjoying that. And also, last but not least, I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Twin Cities there, and I got a chance to drop by the Fantasy Flight Game Center. And I must say, I was pleasantly surprised. Three things I did not expect at the Fantasy Flight Game Center. One, it's quite large, and the food is actually tasty. Two, they sell more than just Fantasy Flight games. They actually sell a whole variety of games, and they carry a whole variety. They carry a bunch of Games Workshop stuff also, but that's not really a surprise because they sell board games. But they have all the miniature lines too. But they also have a very large gaming area, not only set up for board games, but also set up for miniature games. They have many dedicated miniature gaming tables. People are playing Warmachine in there and Hordes and everything else right next to GW, and no one cares. It's a happy, fun time. They have a dedicated painting area with lights and paints and everything for you to paint your models and hang out. It was a really awesome experience. And so, I was blown away by it. No price to go in, except if you want to buy food. But they do have such a great selection of games. So don't think it's only, Fantasy Flight or Asmodee games. It's everything. So definitely if you're in the Twin Cities area and you have not dropped by the Fantasy Flight Game Center, you are missing out on a really, really cool gamery experience. So drop by and check that out. So, is that achievements?
That is achievements.
That's
Yeah.
I'm achieved out.
The D6 generation. Not as good as Lord of the Rings, but better than The Hobbit.
But the Hobbits has the lovely Hobbitses. Smeagol, there is only one Hobbits in the Hobbits. There are 1, 2, many Hobbits in the Lord of the Rings.
Well, you know what that sound means. That sound means it's time to talk about our friends over at Lone Wolf Development.
Lone Wolf Development, they come up with the tools that make the games more fun.
Exactly right. Our friends over there at Lone Wolf keep us deeply ensconced in some of our favorite software. This past weekend, I just set up my daughter on RealmWorks. As an aspiring DM herself, she is loving the tool. No better way to really organize your campaign, keep track of all those crazy plot points, where the party found that special magical item, which the stats are instantly you can find for your favorite villain manning that particular ambush. All those things are easily available in RealmWorks, but that's only one of the triad of tools they have available, right, Craig?
The triad.
Yes, the triad of tools.
Well, you've got Army Builder, of course, is the big one.
Yeah.
And that's the one that I'm most involved with. That you take any miniatures game, go out there, there's files for it, and you can have as much fun coming up with your armies as you do playing the game. Sometimes more fun, depending on the game.
Exactly right. And of course, in addition to Army Builder and of course our RealmWorks, you have Hero Lab, the ultimate way to create your characters for any of your favorite RPGs, including a great iPad version for Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons as well. So check it all out over at Lone Wolf Development or wolflair.com. And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present... Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep. Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, and now I'm relegating to announcing this pap. Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to another App of the Ep. This time around, I got two quick ones here. I want to give you a little follow-up on Quantum Break. I think I mentioned it earlier this episode, and I think I spoke about it once before in App of the Ep. And what I really am enjoying about Quantum Break on the Xbox One is it's sort of a third-person shooter, but the twist is there's time powers, right? So you can trap enemies in time bubbles and then fire some bullets into the time bubble, and the bullets get trapped in the time bubble. When the bubble collapses, the bullets keep moving and kill the dude or whatever. And then also you can accelerate time, dodge time, create time shields, that kind of thing. But what's really interesting about the game is the story, which is this sci-fi story about sort of time breaking down and time travel and how what kind of interesting things could happen if someone invented a time machine. And there's really these two, the antagonist and the protagonist. And what's interesting about the game that I thought was really fascinating was after each sort of chapter or act or major level, you cut over and you play the bad guy, the antagonist, for a moment. And what's interesting about this is you don't really like fight with him or anything, but what you do is make an important decision. And as the game progresses, you're really choosing two paths each time you play the main bad guy there. And you're really, what feels neat about it to me is I feel a little bit like the Dungeon Master all of a sudden. Like I'm flipping over and I'm feeling sort of like how the forces of well, you're not even really sure who the bad guys are essentially, but how who appears to be the main bad guy is sort of dealing with what the hero's doing and dealing with all the other things that are happening, and sort of how if he has a psychosis, how is he dealing with the psychosis and how is he breaking down, which is really kind of interesting, because then what happens is you watch a short half an hour sort of TV episode, if you will, although the episodes are only available within the game, of live action, continuing the story, what you just played through. So you play a level, you make a decision with the bad guy, and then you watch a short, half hour essentially episode that's just pure video. You just watch it of actors who look great because they look just like the characters rendered in the game. So you really don't. There isn't really a cognitive disconnect between the two. You watch an episode. And what's kind of interesting about this, too, is it does tie together because the little things you do in the game appear in the episode. So you can cause little Easter eggs to occur that if you did it, choice A or B, different Easter eggs occur in there. So you do feel like what you're doing is affecting the story, but also the story you watch is really impacted by that choice you made for the bad guy. So it's sort of like you get more insight into what's happening there. And then you go back to the next chapter of the main game, and it feels like one cohesive, giant, massive story. Really interesting. It's not a grade A best sci-fi written story ever, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm really thinking it's interesting, and it's a really interesting form of interactive storytelling. And I hope it does well enough where other game companies will try similar things, because it really is a full multimedia interactive event, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I took a break from it for a while, just came back to it, and I'm really, really getting into it again. So that's Quantum Break. One other really little quick one for you, a little quick win on your phone. I just discovered this little game that my daughters would like, but I'm really finding it quite addicted to myself, and that is Stampede on iOS. And the premise of the game is very simple. It's one of those free games, and they try to make money off you buying more stuff, of course, a freemium game. However, it's the nice thing about this one is you don't have to buy anything. Buying stuff really just unlocks more cosmetic things if you want them. But the premise of the game is very, very simple. You're a little cowboy or cowgirl, and essentially with a lasso, and essentially you ride different animals, and you hold your finger down on the phone, and you ride the animal, and then when you let go of your finger, you lift your finger up, the little cowboy or cowgirl leaps from the back of the animal, sort of slow motionly flies through the air, and what you're hoping is that a different animal in the stampede gets under your cowboy in time where you tap the phone again and hold your finger down, and he or she lassos the next animal, lands on its back, and begins to ride that animal. Kind of like a cross between a stampede of animals and a rodeo rider bouncing from animal to animal through a stampede. And the nuance here is, you're in a stampede of wildebeest, jumping from wildebeest to wildebeest, and all of a sudden you see a zebra in the distance, you jump to the zebra. If you ride the zebra long enough, you will now unlock the zebra, and it gets added to your sort of steampunk flying dirigible zoo, essentially. And here's where it turns a little bit like into Zuluretto or something, where now you have multiple pens on this giant flying zoo, and the more different animals you're able to successfully ride, the more they get added to your zoo. The more animals in your zoo, the more money you get from visitors to your zoo between, when you're not using your phone, and then the more money you get, allows you to put upgrades into your zoo. So it's kind of like Zuluretto meets a Stampede game. It's silly fun. It's a little time waster, but actually it's very cute. My girls are loving it, especially my youngest, because she loves cute little animals, and so unlocking them, and they don't just have like regular animals. There's some fantastical animals in there too. Like if you look hard enough, you'll find an elephant wearing green pants and a green shirt and a crown, which is obviously clearly a reference to Barbar the elephant. So things like that. So really a fun little game, and that's Stampede on iOS. Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the App, a segment in which, hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show. Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class.
Hey, welcome back. And many of you will have noticed that we have been discussing Warmachine quite a bit. Mostly in regards to Adepticon and what we've been noticing a little bit locally, but mostly at Adepticon and things like that. And of course, everyone who's been listening for any length of time knows that Norbert is our resident expert on Warmachine.
Exactly.
And of course, those who have been listening for any length of time know how much Russ loves alliteration.
Indeed.
So clearly, I don't even think he starts with an idea and then comes up with an alliterative title. I think he comes up with these alliterative titles and then fits an idea into them. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the Warmachine Meta and Models Methodology Clinic.
Wow.
I actually added one there. So
You did. I like the methodology. That's 3 M's.
And now there's an interesting meta to our meta discussion, actually.
Yeah.
Because some folks that are interested or aware of Warmachine and Hordes know that the sort of meta or the accepted meta is that Warmachine is a late game sort of game where your warcasters get stronger because they get more focused because they don't have as many jacks to worry about, or at least your main guy gets stronger. Whereas in Hordes, your main guy, the warlock, gets weaker because he has to get his fury from his animals and they're dying off. So the meta behind the meta is that Russ and I are recording later than normal to try to compensate because Norbert is far away. Norbert, however, is up about 2 hours before the crack of dawn.
Right.
So what we're seeing is that Norbert's going to be late show strong.
Right.
Russ and I are going to try to be early show strong, and we'll sort of cross in the middle.
Right.
So that's the meta behind the meta. I want to see how this works out. Ready and go.
Right. So we're kind of the Warmachine to Norbert's Hordes is what you're saying.
Exactly.
I followed that. Okay. I'm with you.
Yeah. Vice versa.
Well,
actually. Vice versa, because he'll be getting stronger because it's getting a more reasonable hour. While we will be getting exactly. We are the warlocks, and we will be getting progressively weaker.
So maybe the place to start, and Norbert, since you are would you describe yourself as a seriously competitive Warmachine player?
Not anymore.
No.
But
would you try? Would you? Well, okay. Let me ask you this: how many games of Warmachine?
We're trying to establish credibility here.
Do you typically play in a given quarter?
Let me put it this way: I don't play any other game at all.
Okay,
not
there you
board games, not computer games,
right?
Not phone games, nothing.
This is your game.
This is his gaming life. Warmachine Hordes.
As the kids say, this is your jam, Norbert.
Yeah, it really is. It's because I'm more of a, I would say, community builder these days.
You are, and that's awesome.
So, and I use this as a vehicle because I enjoy the game, obviously, but it's more about getting people together and enjoying time with each other. So, which
positions you well for my curious question, which is, so you watch the community very carefully. You if not run, then you certainly help run and organize, competitive events and fun events. And so you are as familiar as anyone else with the, as we say, the metagame in Warmachine and Hordes, meaning...
Oh, yeah,
so
absolutely,
when we say... Well, first of all, how would you describe the term metagame to... board gamers, metagame doesn't really make as much meaning as it does to miniature war gamers. So when we talk about the metagame in miniature wargaming, what do we mean by that?
Well, to me, it means that the way the game is played, despite having a fixed rule set, it can shift over time as the community picks up different trends because the depth of the game usually allows that sort of thing. So there'll be something that will be quite popular at one point, and then people will start to, just like evolution really, then people will start teching against that sort of thing by changing the way they play or changing the type of models they take, and that'll shift the way that the game is played, or new models occasionally get introduced, or the way that the organized play rules are written will change, and so suddenly people will adapt to that. So it's a constantly shifting back and forth kind of a situation, not very quickly, but easily over the course of 4 to 6 months or so, you'll see those kind of shifts.
Right. So where do you feel like the Warmachine Mark II, sort of the last edition, if you will, as of a couple weeks ago, of Warmachine, where do you think that was sort of heading? Where do you think the consensus was that it was sort of going right before the Mark III version was announced?
Yeah, I think, and people were already actually kind of finding the game a little stale in some sense because there weren't a lot of changes in terms of organized play, and part of that was because Privateer Press decided to move the release of their organized play rules, which is a critical part of the game as much as like the actual rules of how to play the game themselves. They shifted that from the beginning of January, like usual, and they shifted it to June at their big marquee convention called Lock and Load. And that takes place, so that was in June. So that means there was an 18-month kind of gap before something new was going to come out rather than the usual 12 months. And so there was no change in that way. So that means people are starting to play the same sort of lists, and those lists had kind of centered around a meta where there was lots of high armor and lots of hitbox type of models on the table. So lots of meat for people to get through. And so the list hadn't changed in a long time, and so they were kind of focused around that meta, and so it was beginning to also be a little creaky. Like people were finding kind of all the bizarre kind of nuances to the rules, and those had all been kind of like say figured out. Nothing really new had been changing at that point. So I would say, very generally speaking, that the game had become a little static at that point and around a very certain type of build.
Now, referencing that build, Norbert, do you by meat do you mean that people were fielding lots of multi-wound infantry and cavalry kind of thing?
Yes, but that, or in certain instances, like for Crick's particular faction, they would do just plain infantry spam in many instances.
Okay.
Where it'd be lots of single wound type models.
So basically, what happened at the end of Mark 1, where everybody started to feel that the warjacks, the big giant steam powered robots that were the center of the theme of the game, had sort of taken a back seat to the infantry and the cavalry, which were new at that time. And Mark 2 was kind of intended to sort of address that. That sort of has happened again.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because that is true to an extent. So they had tried to shift it, going back from Mark 1 to Mark 2, to more warjack oriented, and that definitely helped to a degree. But then Colossals and Gargantuans entered the stage, and so that kind of shifted a little bit. And certain Colossals were better than others, and so they were seen. Some were seen, and some weren't at all. But in some instances, like with Crick's, maybe some other armies that like Retribution, infantry still was plenty strong, and so there was really loads of reasons to take infantry over warjacks, and so you saw that reflected.
Right. Well, Russ and I saw that last night when I tried to make a Mark III list with my Retribution force, and almost all I have is infantry.
Right.
Well, so you're like in the really odd situation where Retribution is probably one of the few factions that came out with infantry being still quite strong, and probably as prevalent as warjacks in their builds. So
that's what I felt at the end of our game.
Right.
So you're in a really peculiar position, but everybody else, the switch, at least for now, the switch is pretty dramatically the other way around.
Interesting.
And so another thing I think was interesting was that I think what we saw to sort of happen during Mark II was, I think Privateer always knew this, but for some reason, the missions that came in the core rulebook of Mark II were pretty good, but they weren't. But they really learned a lot over the course of the Steamroller events, I would say. And Norbert, correct me if I'm wrong, over the last few years. And the missions got really interesting. And they did a few innovations, I think, that were sort of interesting over the course of the last, which was sort of asymmetrical deployment zone depth based on whether you're player 1 or player 2, and a lot more interesting rules around flags and capturing objectives, and a lot more missions around that sort of thing. And how did that it reinvigorated Craig and I started discovering that when I played Warmachine and Hordes, even casually, I preferred to use the missions from Steamroller because I just found them so much more tactically interesting. And even my daughter, who's relatively a new player to the game, also really enjoyed playing those missions more. We just ignored the missions in the Mark II core rulebook. Do you think, how impactful was those different styles of missions on the meta in Mark II?
Well, hugely. I mean, to me, the Steamroller rules were as much as the core game as the actual mechanical rules. Yeah. So it actually refreshed the game on a regular basis every year. I mean, there weren't made towards the beginning of Mark II. There were maybe some more bigger shifts in Steamroller from one edition to the next, or 1 year to the next. Towards the end, it was more of a refinement situation, which probably maybe also led to the stagnation or perceived stagnation. But those rules really is what really changed the game, and you would actually anticipate them coming out quite heavily every January. because you would be playing the game a little bit differently as a result in many instances. And it also was an easier way for Privateer Press to keep the game fresh, because adding models to the game is difficult. It takes a lot of time and effort. But changing the rules is a little easier, and still made a big change to the game. And yeah, I mean, I don't think people played maybe the beginners and things would play from the book because that's all they knew. But after that, everybody just would play with Steamroller even down in a club casually, just because it was, everybody knew those scenarios and that they actually work well, just like you said.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you think people were starting to think near the, beginning of this year? I think people probably could feel that the change was in the air, and a few folks probably knew something was happening. But what do you, I guess I'd like to understand, what do you think the community was hoping for in a meta change, or what were people kind of casually or talking about between games at a tournament, kind of saying, boy, I wish they did this, or I wish they did that? Where do you feel the fan base wanted them to go? And then let's talk about what Privateers sort of said their stated goals for Mark III are. But where do you think the community wanted to see them go?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because I definitely think there was probably two different camps. I think there was one group that really was just looking for Mark 2.5, meaning just a cleanup of the rules, streamlining all the kind of nuances that have been coming out and kind of were all over the place rather than one place. Maybe some minor tweaking to some of the models that were just not right, because towards the end of Mark II, actually Privateer Press got a little more aggressive with their release of errata, changing the balance of some of the models. And so people were like, oh, maybe this is the new trend. And some people were quite happy with that. But then there were others who were really looking for an entirely new shakeup of the game. They just, and I don't think they had any particular goal in mind. They just like I said, felt so static about the game that they just wanted something different, something, clearly they would say they wanted something better, but how did that came about? I don't think they had enunciated.
It was part of that because the game had become so well understood by the community that there were just certain builds and lists you just expected to see that would perform well. Like, certain factions were considered undervalued, or certain build types and factions were like, oh crud, it's this combo from Signar or that combo from Crix. I guess I better have this particular response, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think it's this kind of weird gamer meta when people would go to tournaments and things, the drive to win, not to say that they're overly competitive, but like an innate desire to win means that you wouldn't bring lists that were kind of outside the grain very far. And so there's only a few people at that point who will truly innovate and try to find out entirely different builds that still do a good job. But most people don't do that. And so consequently, just like you said, people felt like they would see the same lists over and over again, or felt like they had to play the same lists over and over again. Whether that's true or not, as I said, might be more of a perception thing, but that's how it went down. And so I think people look for things that are out of control, essentially, which is like a company changing the rules to kind of help reset things for them.
And I think one more thing we should probably understand before we start getting into sort of how we think the meta is going to shift into Mark III, and that is, what was sort of the community's feeling towards the difference between Hordes and Warmachine? I mean, Craig sort of hinted at it in the beginning that, Warmachine is an early game. I'm sorry, the other way around. Hordes is an early game force, and Warmachine Force is generally a later game force. But was there seen, especially given some of the steamroller missions and things, was there advantages seen overall to Hordes versus Warmachine based on the focus mechanic or the fury mechanic or anything like that?
In some instances, I think that's true. So I think some warcasters, if they camped all their focus, so kept it all, so they had very high armor, became very hard to deal with, and that contributed to some of the armor skew. And so, you could say that was ultimately not good for the game. Not all warcasters could do that, but some of them could do it extremely well. And so that might have been, not really fun, because it kind of made them like bullies on the table, essentially. And then some warlocks, I think, were very hard to assassinate because of the fact that they could transfer away so many of their so many hits via their fury mechanic. Whether they got too weak then towards the end, I'm not as convinced about that as maybe some, but it definitely was a feeling there as well. whether one overall game versus the other was stronger, I wouldn't say that's the case. I think it really came down to builds, that certain lists were considered strong in each of the factions, and more or less every faction had a couple of those builds.
Got it.
So you could play any faction. It's just you'd have maybe only a limited defined set of like accepted lists at that point.
Got it. Now, so let me ask you a more personal question now. So Norbert, when you started hearing the rumors of Mark III, but maybe before you heard what Privateer Press's stated goal was, what in your heart were you hoping Mark III would mean? What were you hoping they would try to do?
Me personally, I definitely wanted a Mark III, like a wholesale change, and I think it was because. Not because I still enjoying the game or whatever, but I can see that people were kind of drifting away from it, and that there were other. Today's miniature game market is so competitive, meaning there's so many different games now possible to choose from. You can't really remain kind of stagnant because people just look at the new shiny essentially.
Right.
And I thought it was an opportunity for them to not only clean up, but also kind of just change the way the game is played a little bit potentially. And so if you're going to make the change. For me, I'd rather have gone just wholesale. So I was quite pleased to hear that in the end that it was that was their goal, and that's what they decided to do.
So what did you? So when you went to, we'll talk more detail how you've been engaged with it, because you obviously went to Lock and Load. You got to experience the new rules as they were sort of being announced and as they were being evolved. But so let's talk about what did Privateer Press come out and say when they announced Mark III, which wasn't that long ago. It was kind of very different than Mark II, right? Where Mark II, they said literally years in advance, or at least a year in advance, hey, we're going to do this thing called Mark II. We're going to beta test the heck out of it. Anybody can get the rules early, give us feedback. With Mark III, it was kind of like, hey, guess what? Mark III's coming out in June. This is like May, right?
Yeah.
Mark III's coming out in June. We've already got it done and dusted. Digital versions are coming out in June. You can buy the hardcover version in end of June. Hope you like it. We're really proud of it. Here it is, Mark III, right? What'd you think when they came in it that way?
Yeah, let's review. Mark II was a whole different story. So I don't remember how they announced that they were going to do the Mark II, but then it went into, like you said, I think it was a year or so of open beta.
Yeah.
And then the books for each faction were released one a month over the course of the next year. That's in 2010.
Yeah.
So it was a very slow burn in that sense. And here, just like you said, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there were rumors, obviously there's stuff happening, but all of a sudden, then it was just announced via they're very good at social media now, so they have all these different releases via their blog and via their own podcast and stuff like that. And so they announced it, they stated their intentions, and then they had a very regular release schedule it was 6 weeks in advance of Lock and Load. Lock and Load was the official launch. Or at least pre-launch. And then they had, so like I said, in those coming weeks, they had a review of each faction, a review of the core rules that they were going to change, the way the models were going to be different maybe. In terms of the actual physical models, how they were making them and stuff like that. So you were very well informed as you went up to it, and they drip fed it all the way through to Lock and Load. And then Lock and Load was going to have, really amazingly, it was going to have all the new battle boxes there on sale. So those are like the starter boxes. Mm-hmm. It was going to have, you could buy the rules there, the actual hardcover rules. Mm-hmm. But everybody else in the world got the rules digitally the same day, which was June 13th, I think? Yes. June 12th or 13th.
Yep.
12th, June 12th. Everybody could get the rules, and they could download the War Room app and get all the cards for the models. So you could actually start playing at home if you wanted to very early on Sunday morning, depending on where you were in the world, or late Saturday night on the left side of the USA.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So they had established this idea of the digital War Room back in Mark II, came out with a new edition of the app called War Room 2 for Mark III. That's a little confusing, but there you go.
Yeah.
And so instantly now there's a way for everyone to get the latest edition of the cards. You have to pay for them again. And the rule books, which you didn't have to pay for, you just get digital PDFs of the Hordes and Warmachine rule books, Prime and Primal. Right there. And nowadays, everybody's got a way to consume that, whether either their e-reader or their phone or their tablet. And so you're off to the races, right? You pretty much got a full edition of the game with all new cards, as however long it takes you to download 20 megs of data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is pretty
you could literally start playing Mark III that moment, like everybody else.
If everything worked out great.
Well, yeah.
It did not for everybody.
Craig ran into a few bugs there.
Is it bug laden, Norbert, or is it just my bad luck?
You mean talking about War Room 2?
Yes, War Room 2.
So I found that most people did not have a problem with it. Like there were definitely bugs in the program and things like that. But most people commented on how easily it installed, and also that they were able to unlock the cards very quickly and without any problems. So I'm really sorry that you're having this much trouble
on 2 different devices.
Yeah, I think it's iOS versus Android.
2 different problems. I was going to say, I think the iOS might be a lot better than their Android.
Historically, it has been, so that wouldn't surprise me if that's still the case.
So
anyway, so it was a great concept, and I'm glad it's working for the rest of the universe. But anyway, continue.
That's okay.
So it came out. So what did you think as you started to hear the rules, even before you played it? Did you think? And we're going to talk more about the rules in detail later. So, but more about the meta. What did you hear them saying about the meta, and did it resonate with you, and did it resonate with other members of the community that you had contact with? Did you start to feel like Privateer Press was going in the direction you think people wanted?
Yeah, I was really pleased. I thought I heard 3 different things when they were talking about the philosophy that they wanted with Mark III. One is to, first of all, just streamline the game some more. And that meant both collecting the rules that have been scattered around a bit over the course of the evolution of the game, and also just taking a look at the rules again, the core rules, and deciding what does make sense, what does make sense, what needs to change as a result. So that was pretty encouraging. And then the next thing is that they said they wanted to look at every model again to see what its purpose was and evaluate its abilities and also its point costs. So there's an entirely new shift. They didn't say it was going to be like dramatically everything gets changed for the sake of change, but they were looking at each one and were willing to make those kind of changes. They, as part of that, they wanted Warjacks and Warbeasts to be front and center. They're marquee type of models, just like they said for Mark II, but it sounded like they wanted to be more aggressively so this time around, which was also welcome. And then the last bit is that they wanted to make the game more accessible to players, particularly new players. So there were ways that they were going to try to make it that people could pick up the game more easily. So those were the kind of the 3 things I said, and I welcomed, as a community builder, I thought all 3 of those were perfect, just what I wanted.
And as you started to read the rules and see what they were actually doing, did you feel like they were achieving on those goals?
Yeah. I mean, it remains to be seen, as always, as people now have to figure it out. I mean, it's weird because it was such a quick dump compared to Mark II's release that nobody has any really idea what they're doing. If you look now, everyone's saying, "Oh, what do you think about this list?" And everyone kind of shrugs their shoulders. She said, "Fine, try it," which is great. It's a great position to be in. I mean, there's no preconceived notions, which was exactly what people felt like was the end of Mark II, as everything was preconceived.
Well, exactly, because that's what my daughter and I are noticing already. It's less about reading the core primal rules and understanding the core rule changes, which was a lot more in Mark II, right? Like I felt like, I don't know, we can talk about more of this later, but I felt like more core rules changed in Mark II than they are in Mark III, although there are some important subtle ones maybe. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I felt like each individual card being revamped, the models themselves have subtly and not so subtly changed in their abilities quite a bit.
Yes.
And so what we're finding is a lot of those tricks just don't work anymore. My daughter plays Kaya in Circle, and her Dimension Door power or Spirit Door power is very different than it was a couple weeks ago. So that opens very different tactics. And what she's looking at now is not that she's just enfranchised with it. She's like, that's cool. But she's like, ooh, I had this other caster I never played because Kaya was so good. I'm going to try this one now, which is kind of exactly what you want to see, right? Mix it up and see different things on the table.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anybody who's still bringing Mark II type lists are, I just don't think they're going to work. And that's fine. You could start that way and just it helps you maybe see the changes and everything. And I think the rules, like you said, they've been changed significantly, but with a lighter touch, perhaps, or more subtle touch than you might expect. So, rather than having entirely new rule book, they've changed enough tweaks here and there that suddenly models just behave much differently than they used to before. And so, consequently, I think that it's going to require a lot more exploration by the players to try to figure this out than maybe it was from Mark I to Mark II.
Yeah.
I don't know about anybody else, but I can't wait for the next segment. I want Norbert to tell me how this game has changed because it felt I think Russ and I were both playing Mark II last night.
Yeah.
With occasional oh no, now we do it this way. Oh, okay.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah, I would not be surprised by that. That's how I feel about it too. I think those subtle changes, though, you do have to keep in mind because they actually, in some instances, are quite key the way they change the game. But it's the way those new rules, or just the nuances those rules interact with the models. I think the models themselves have probably changed more than the core rules have, and so you'll see that be over the gaming, which is actually a good thing. That means that, like yourself, you felt like you're playing Mark II, except for a couple tweaks. That's good. That means you don't have to. That barrier is much lower.
It was accessible.
And here's one example. Here's one example, right? So like I have run gun mages, right?
Okay.
Since the very beginning. They're the first unit of models I ever painted because I love the tricorner hats. So I've run gun mages since the very beginning. And
it's been all about the hats since the very beginning.
They've largely worked the same, right? So now I've got them out there on the table, same unit. I'm getting ready to attack one of Craig's Ret units there, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, so he's got stealth, no problem. Where's my true sight? Oh crap! Right?
Yeah.
But wait, they've got gunfighter now. So my plan now is charge him, which is like a completely different plan than you would have had, 2 weeks ago with gun mages, and it worked surprisingly well. But it was just like a totally different way to play that unit, and yet I had really cool visuals of my guys getting in there close and just all of a sudden messing things up. So it was just a whole different,
which is a lot cooler visual than normal, where they're like, desperately like, might as well throw ourselves away with our weak little swords.
Right. So it's a whole different. So it is. I think what's interesting about it is I think a lot of the big changes are, as you said, Norbert, in the models and unit card changes themselves. And we'll talk more later. There are some significant, small but impactful changes to the core rules. But it really is, you got to reread every single unit twice because you're just going to assume, that it works the same and it doesn't, right? So you just got to reread it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so another change is, clearly the Warjacks and the Warbeasts, they've I think had a much heavier hand in the way the rules are written that kind of force you to use them and also want you to use them than Mark I to Mark II did. So right now, everybody is. I think it'll shift. Privateer Press, even in their social media, has said that it'll probably shift back to those slightly more balanced forces. But right now, everybody's going bonkers with adding loads of jacks and beasts into their lists.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting.
I need a couple more of those.
Yes. So, Norbert, let's talk a little bit about, because we'll get into all that in the next segment, but let's talk more about this.
We need to walk this fine line.
Well, I think we haven't gotten into the accessibility and the boxing of the models. And something else I think I want to talk a little bit about is the story of the evolution of the story of Warmachine 2, because I feel like when I look at the boxes and the starter boxes, and they just announced or revealed the new 2-player starter box today or yesterday, right? And so the new 2-player box has got a ton of models. You get like a battle force of Signar, a battle group of Cricks, and then you get a full unit of Cricks in there and a full unit of Signar in there, all the dice, the rules, everything for like $70 or something. It's pretty affordable. But what's freaking me out is when you look at the starter boxes, it's like all new casters. And I don't mean like they swiped Stryker out with Haley. I mean someone you've never heard of before. It's like the entire story is shifted to another set. It's like almost like Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's like, what happened to Kirk? Kind of thing. Like Stryker's still there. All your old friends are still there, but it's almost like they're the last generation people who you followed. Now there's this new generation of heroes in the story, and let's get to know them. Right? Did you get that feeling?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was really interesting. That was probably the most puzzling to me. That sure, not only do they have new characters in the new battle boxes, which you point out, but the entire storyline has arbitrarily just been shifted 2 years forward with no intervening stories. Right. And I found that really interesting because I don't know. Sure, I can understand it being a nice break, but like, why 2 years? And how are they going to cover the gap of those 2 years, or if they ever will? They did say that they're going to put a lot more content into Skull Island Expeditions, which is their kind of like publishing arm.
Books, right.
So maybe that stuff will come out sooner than later. I don't know. But like you said, it does lead to this like new generation feeling, which it contributes to the whole new war kind of concept. That's their slogan, all new war.
Right.
Because everything has changed enough, including the fiction and consequently the characters that you're going to be using. So I could see it, and I think it's actually good. It was just probably the pretty surprising addition to the whole thing. So kudos to them. They really went big on this edition, which I'm quite pleased with.
Yeah. So what do you feel about the new, you hinted at the new boxes and making it more, so what are your feelings on the new battle boxes?
They are great.
What do you like about them?
The old ones were good, actually. I think they were a good way to get new players into the game. But these are amazing. And the value, I have to look up and just say, because I don't know. So they're $40, okay, retail. Mm-hmm. And what you get in the box, it's a nice chunky box. And in it is a Warcaster or Warlock, okay? Just assume the same for both systems, okay? Right. So it's a Warcaster and a few jacks. And you get with it then, but everything else that you need to play, which is amazing. So you get a miniature version of the rule book, the entire rules. You get a little faction booklet, so a booklet that explains a bit about your faction and about some of the models that you could buy to complement the models that you've already purchased in the box. They also have a basic training booklet, which is a kind of like helps you understand what a miniatures game is at a fundamental level, and then also has a walkthrough of the turn or different situations that you can kind of work through. And to help you walk through those things, they actually give you a mat. So there's like a little like a paper game board in there. I think it's 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet maybe. One side of it has a bunch of like circles with letters on them to help you kind of walk to match what's going on in the training book. The other side is the same map but with nothing on it, so it looks cleaner to play on. It comes with a little paper ruler. It comes with some terrain pieces, like cardboard, like very basic but cardboard terrain pieces to add to it. A set of dice and a set of tokens that you can use a dry erase marker on to write down your effects on, things like that. So literally everything to start playing the game right out of the box. If you need zero experience in miniature gaming to kind of get started with it, all for $40, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I think that is a great deal. I saw those, and then the two, as I mentioned earlier, 2-player boxes, essentially that double it, add 2 units, all the same stuff for like $80, which is even better. So yeah, I think that's really. Really
it's
impressive.
90. I was just double checking. 90 for that one. Yeah, that's right.
But it's still a great deal.
And I want to mention the way they work the battle boxes is important though too, because what they did in the past, the battle boxes have been criticized being unbalanced against one another.
Right.
These were all designed to be specifically played against one another, to be balanced against one another, and. Yeah, and interestingly, the Warjacks and Warbeasts they give you is exactly the same amount of Warjack points or Warbeast points that the Warcaster has. So it's essentially a 0. You start at 0-point army. So if you went to a 50-point tournament, for instance, thereafter, you would then know that all you got to do is buy 50 points of other models to complement your battle box, and you're good to go.
Exactly. That's really cool, and the reception to those has been great by the community at large. Do you think people?
They're really good. And as a press carrier myself, I just find them going to be making my job a lot easier because I can really, with confidence, tell people this is what you need. Just pick up whichever one that kind of interests you, and you're ready to go without any hesitation. Not feeling like you have to modify it or anything like that. Now, really good.
Do you know if they changed anything in their manufacture? Are these models basically the same as they've always done, or have they enhanced anything manufacturing-wise to make this affordability possible?
So that's a very interesting question because Privateer Press is in a very transitional phase right now, and they have been for a little while. So before they started doing only metal models, and very famously then they moved into resin-type models, and then they moved into using the soft plastic kind of models. Some people call it rustic, I guess. Yeah. But it's the kind of models, sort of the kind of plastic that you might get in a board game type of miniature. And then they've also been working now with hard plastic, which is what like GW is known for. And so right now their range consists of all those different types of materials. What comes in the battle box, though, are the soft plastic type of models. And they've probably gotten most familiar with those, I would say, because most of the models are that these days, like the new ones. And so maybe that's why they're able to make it so affordable, because they've got that kind of processed manufacturing down.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So before we run out of time with this segment, and then we get into, of course, the actual rules, which I can't really talk about. I do want to ask you, so we kind of talked about the build-up here, how Privateer sort of announced it, in early May, and then over the course of weeks sort of leaked more and more information about it through their podcasts and their website. And they coordinated all around this giant epic event, their own personal convention, Lock and Load. And this year they had 2 Lock and Loads on the same weekend, one in Seattle, their home base, and then one in Germany. And you were lucky enough to go to Germany. So how did the big event come out? I mean, that was where the first sort of, battle could take place in Mark III. The new rules were right there. How was the event? Did they manage to pull off what they were trying to pull off? And did people generally, are they really excited about what they saw? What was the reaction?
Okay. So first of all, there were actually more lock and load outposts, they called them, beside the German one. Yeah. There was one in Paris and one also in the north of England. So we had 4 kind of events happening around the world at the same time, which was really cool. Very cool, actually. Yeah. And a couple of things. They announced ahead of time. They were very good about this, which was really excellent. They said rather than having everybody standing in line for days before, to buy these new battle boxes, they weren't going to release them until the keynote on Saturday night Seattle time, like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So for most people, that was either really late at night or first thing Sunday morning for us in Europe. And but what was nice is that they said, so that's when it'll be released and when we're going to give the rules out and also have people be able to buy the models. But what they did is that they said anytime during the course of the convention up to that point, you could go to the store and pre-order whatever you wanted. And they would then have all the stuff prepackaged, and then they would have different pickup stations all around the convention so that you had only a very short line to wait in before you could pick up the models, because everything would be already arranged and there was only a certain number of people in each of the different groups. And I thought that was really great. It was just so much more sensible than having these incredibly long queues when people couldn't then play other things or do other things. And so they just had to stand around in line. So kudos to them for that. And that worked actually extremely well. Certainly did in Germany. That's the only one I can really speak of, but I didn't hear anybody else complaining about things. It was really, really well done. So kudos on that. So I think their idea was that all the Mark II stuff would wrap up in the prior 2 days of Lock and Load. So they had a number of big tournaments, particularly their Iron Gauntlet one, which is kind of like a year-long kind of adventure for people, gathering points and then doing a final in Seattle. They wanted that all done and out of the way, and then they were going to do the keynote, and then they expected everybody to have like their first opportunity to read the rules and read the cards and start kind of putting their battle boxes together and playing with their other models. The only hitch to all that was I don't know how long, maybe 3 weeks ahead of the event or so, a major portion of the cards got leaked.
Ooh, right.
on the internet. Yeah, it's the modern way of things these days. And so, and in one sense, it got everybody really hyped up because now everybody was reading all the rules or models and trying to compare them to each other and seeing what they meant and this and that. So it was really kind of a huge thing. But that meant that kind of like all-in-one release on Saturday night wasn't happening. At least it wasn't for me, I have to admit. I did play in one Mark II tournament, to be fair, on the Friday. but then after that, I was using those rules to play casual games, essentially. And it was kind of a mix. The casual section of the conventions have gotten quite big, which is really great. And there was a mix of people playing Mark II there, but loads of people also playing Mark III. So there's a bit of a kind of weird mix of it. But then on the Sunday, everybody playing Mark III naturally, and it was a big excitement anyway. I didn't think it took away from very much. If anything, it kind of get people more comfortable with things so that when they're playing it officially. And in fact, on Sunday, what was cool in Germany, one of the press gangers decided to make a tournament out of it. So we were, it was kind of a very easy format, nothing too crazy, but at the same time, because everybody was familiar with it, there was enough people. We had I think 14 different people playing in that tournament. So I got to say I was in the first Mark III tournament, which was really exciting to me.
That's very cool. And so at the end of the weekend, so you played in your first Mark III tournament, and we'll talk more about that, the mechanics of that later. But what was the general feeling from everyone at the end of the weekend? Was it like wow, they really nailed this and we can't wait to dig in? Or was it kind of like, were there parts people were disappointed about? Or what do you think? Was it generally a success?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, even without the leak, or with the leak, basically, I think people really were pleasantly perplexed by the way the game has been changed and how to build lists as a result. And that's exactly what you want. Everything was fine to try out. Nobody had better advice than anybody else. I mean, that was the best part about this. Everybody was reset to a very, very baseline. Even if you were a new player, a medium player, a super competitive player, nobody knew what they were doing or how things were really going to shake out. Right. And so nobody felt like you had to do anything. You could try whatever you wanted at that point. And that's been a really exciting part about it. Everything was new. The core rules were new. The models were new. The Steamroller package was new. That got released as well. Yep. So we saw that was new, although that wasn't at Lock and Load, but it was out within a week. The fiction was new. Right. I mean, everything was new and reset to a baseline. And to me, that was just such a great feeling, and I think really important for the game, and will kind of give it the kind of longevity it needs to stay competitive and, as I said, a very crowded marketplace.
Very cool. Well, great. Well, Norbert, thank you so much for giving us the insights into the community here. We're going to take a quick break.
And then the juice.
Then the juice. We'll get into the details. What has changed? What's better? What's different? What's
the meat,
not better? Right.
As Norbert would say.
Exactly. You say that, right, Norbert?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. There you go. We'll be right back.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, Total Fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakeland and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. This week's shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation, and you too can support the show. We thank you very much for that support. This past weekend, I was out in California for a grand adventure that had absolutely nothing to do with gaming and isn't even really nerdy. But where I was at the Toyota Save Mart 350 NASCAR race, which is this big, huge spectacle. And although I'm not a huge NASCAR fan, and I only know a few of the drivers because they're just super famous drivers, I was really excited to see this just because it's always neat to see something that has really rabid fans. Like, fans love what they're fans of, whether it's sports or a convention or board gaming or whatever it is. Fans that are really excited and have a place to celebrate and all get together is kind of cool. I was very excited about this race, and watching it was really fun, and I enjoyed it, and it was a whole new experience, and the race ended quite spectacular fashion with everyone on their feet, which made it even better. So I really enjoyed the race. But here's why I'm mentioning this on a show that has absolutely nothing to do with NASCAR or with racing. Remember what I said about Uber fans? Well, NASCAR folks are fans. I mean, they love NASCAR. You had this field of RVs for people who had come to spend the whole weekend at this track, and everybody had flags flying, and it was, generally speaking, American flag on top, and then the flag supporting whatever driver was their favorite driver right beneath that. And sometimes there was a flag from their state. The state didn't even make it above the driver's flag at times. It was crazy. But they're all in this field, and they're all excited, and they're all celebrating. And when you get inside and you're at the track and you're walking around before the race has begun, people are dying to get down to the track to meet these drivers and to get closer to these cars and to try and grab an autograph. And you see people dressed up. It's like their own version of cosplay. You see kids that are dressed up like the drivers with little outfits that look like the racing suits. There's a driver who has M&Ms, is one of his big sponsors. So his car looks like a giant bag of peanut M&Ms. It's yellow with M&Ms on it. And there's this one crazy lady who had like everything M&M'd, her bag, her clothes, her shoes. She had like a tattoo on her arm that was M&M. She was really excited about this. So she had M&Ms all over her outfit because she supports her driver. And first thought, I'm like, these people are nuts. They're crazy. They're so insane. They're so into this. And then I checked myself because I thought, okay, wait just a second. when I head to Gen Con, there are people that are insanely crazy about all these games that they play, and they dress up like the characters, and the cosplay is awesome. Well, it's not really cosplay at NASCAR event because no one thinks you're actually, Tony Stewart or something, but it shows this incredible level of support and dedication and excitement about something that people are really passionate about. And then I also thought about, as I was wandering around, and it's this real down-to-earth, fun, loud crowd. There's nothing pretentious about a NASCAR race. Everyone that's there is just there and having a good time and eating really horrible for you, tasty fair food, and there to see the race and just enjoy themselves. And you probably have stereotypes in your mind about the kind of folks that visit NASCAR, and you know what? You're going to see a lot of those stereotypes proved out in the real world. But if you go to your average convention, you're going to see a lot of the stereotypes about gamers played out in the real world. And after I watched these guys for a little bit, I kind of thought, you know what? Now I sort of love these people because they do what they do because they love it, and they're there enjoying something, and they're passionate about what they enjoy. And it might be NASCAR instead of gaming, but fans are fans no matter who they are. And I sort of felt like almost a new respect for them because I thought they're the same people that are listening to the show, just with a different passion, just as passionate and just as excited just about something different. So I think I'm trying to broaden my mind and not so much look at fans of things that I don't understand and think, I don't know how they're so into this. Because people look at gaming and go, I don't know how they're so into this. So the next time you see fans at an event or sporting fans that are painted in the colors of their favorite team and standing out there and acting crazy, remember to yourself that you're kind of that guy too if you go to conventions and you really enjoy your hobby. And rather than judging some of those people, kind of embrace it and say, go you, and come along for the ride and have some fun.
Hey, and now it's time to talk about our friends at Geek Nation Tours.
It's summertime. What better time to talk about vacations?
Summertime. It is summertime.
Exactly.
Time when your young man's fancy turns to travel. And indeed, if you want to travel with geeks and folks of your like-minded ilk, there is no better crew to be traveling with than those of Geek Nation Tours. Greg, what is the new hotness from over there? I've heard
the new hotness, Russ, is the Japanese tour trilogy is something that Terrace just released. Okay, it's a tour that's going to focus on Tokyo, covering as much geeky goodness as they could. But they've been getting a lot of requests for giant robot stuff and video gaming stuff, and they're going to fold it all in. Okay, wanted to do an anime shopping tour in Japan. And this one tour is going to have all of those things. They're going to go to a comic convention. They're going to see Akihabara, the geek mecca of all things tech and the home of more video arcades than you can shake a Pikachu at, and all kinds of other cool stuff too. Nakano Broadway, Animate. I mean, I can't even pronounce any of this stuff. So if you're in like any kind of coolness of Japan orientation, this tour is for you.
Exactly right. So head on over to Geek Nation Tours.
Check this out and all the other cool tours as well. Don't forget Gen Con.
This is the Dice Tower Network at Dicetowernetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. And since we have the Prime Minister of Hordes on the show, we thought it was only appropriate that we dive in.
Why can't he be the Prime Minister of Hordes and Warmachine?
Okay, fine. Let's promote him.
Menoth John is the president.
And Menoth John is only the president of Warmachine. So, Norbert, I think we should escalate you to the Prime Minister of Warmachine and Hordes.
Yeah, it's like a United Kingdom of games.
Exactly. The United Kingdom of games.
Too soon?
No, he's taken over. He's rebuilding. It's a rebuilding year.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do...
Russ, you are so naughty.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about a game here, Norbert. I'm talking about a game. Stay on focus.
Right.
All right. So what we're going to do here is you've already heard us talk about, the meta and the models, and now we're going to get into the rules mechanics. What's changed? How did it change? How did the models wake up?
Sorry.
It's the good stuff now, Craig.
I was kidding. It is good stuff.
So there's a couple big things, and we'll dive in here. So one, there's some sort of, what did they change at a high level? Really, the game's not like completely like blow your mind different. It's a bunch of small, but I would argue very impactful rule changes in the core rules.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the other big part of this that makes it feel like a whole new game, especially to those who've been playing for, seriously for a long time, is that every faction card is really completely rethought, right? And some of it's subtle, like just refining rules that were a little bit broken or maybe a little bit imbalanced, or confusing. But there's actually some global philosophies, and we get to the card changes to talk about, I think, and maybe there's some debate about that, Norbert, but I think there's some global philosophies that went through as they swept through the cards that adjusted a few things here and there as well. Mm-hmm. And I think you were mentioning this too, Norbert. There's more advantage in symbols in the game now to kind of standardize. Even more rules have been standardized across the board, right, than were before.
Yeah, they started at Mark II where they had little symbols, kind of like what you'd see in like video games, like little icons and things to represent rules, so you can visually quickly identify them without having a wall of text on the cards. And in Mark III, they've taken further advantage of that by having a whole load of new rules, or the rules streamlined, and then added as new symbols onto the cards. So you see a lot more symbols than in the past, which I really welcome. I mean, it takes a little while to get used to what the symbols mean, but after that, you appreciate it because you don't have to read through a ton of text.
Yep. And in War Room, the app, you should be able to tap on the symbols and get what they mean. There was a couple bugs, but they've worked through most of them now, so that generally works now, which is helpful. Yep. So let's talk, I think, Norbert, it makes the most sense to kind of go through the core rule changes. And we are assuming, listeners, that most of you, this is not a full review of Warmachine from the ground up. We expect that you already kind of know the basics of Warmachine. And if you don't, go check out our other episodes where we review Warmachine, usually involving Norbert. And you can get more information about that. So we're going to presume you know the basics of Warmachine and how that stuff works. But we're going to go first through the core rules and what's different, and then we'll go through some of the cards and maybe some other things like army building and scenarios. But let's start with the core rules. And so, Norbert, I think I'll just go down this list here and you chime in where you think they're impactful. So let me start out for this one, Norbert. You can now pre-measure at any time in Warmachine.
That's right.
How does that make you feel, Norbert?
Well, I'm not used to it, obviously, and it's interesting because it is becoming more of a trend in gaming. So I mean, they're staying on the innovative side of game mechanics, which is really good, I think. But they had some pre-measuring in the game, so like you can measure your control area and there's certain like scenario elements that you could measure and command elements you can measure. So there's quite a bit of it in there that you had to kind of like obtusely figure out what you really wanted to measure sometimes. Mm-hmm. So this is like the next level up, and I'm just still getting used to it because basically you know exactly how far things are going to charge. You know whether you're in range to shoot things, and so I've been finding the game is more of a chess-like match because it isn't a matter of guessing things, but rather how are you going to put the opponent into a situation that they can't deal with, rather than the fact that they may or may not be able to charge you. You see what I mean?
Yes, I love it. I think it does add that, right, a little more. And I think if you come from a world where there hasn't been pre-measuring, so you've been playing pretty much Warmachine and Hordes for a while, your first reaction is probably this is going to slow the game down because everybody's going to measure every possible combination. But I found, since most other miniature war games now allow pre-measuring, actually the opposite happens and it reduces arguments. Because what you do is you say, I'm going to put this guy here and I'm going to keep him out of charge range, and you pre-measure it and show your opponent, I am out of your charge range. And there's never these moments of like, oh my, without pre-measuring, you don't really know that. And all of a sudden you charge the guy and, well, did he nudge his model an extra quarter inch to get the charge? All that just kind of goes away, right? Because so I think the gain really is that. And also it does make the game more tactical, and there's less sort of like luck for one guy because player A is really good at guesstimating distances and player B is not. That is also removed. So I really like it. I think it's welcome. And plus, since you already kind of had it anyway with control radius and you could kind of fudge it most of the time anyway, and you kind of felt like you were cheating when you did it. Now that's all that stuff's gone too. So I really like that as a gamer of other Warm games that have it. So
you know what I find I've been having is that I'll pre-measure their charge range, right? And I'll say, okay, I can go up to that line and not get charged, and then I'll start moving my model there. And I've forgotten to actually move to measure whether I can move that far myself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I'm so worried about where the charge line is going to be. But I also have to measure how far I'm allowed to move before I can move. So just take it something to get used to.
Yeah, my daughter's already fallen in love with it. She's like, this is awesome. She likes it a lot. So, and this is her only miniature war game. So,
And it's the way forward. I mean, seems like most games are trying to do this now.
Yep. So I love that. I think that's a fine change. Now, another big change, and I love this change. So if we go to the control phase for a minute. So as you may remember, quick primer for those, there's the 3-rate, one of the first phase of the turn is sort of the control phase here, or maintenance phase. I always get these backwards.
Maintenance phase, yeah.
Maintenance phase, thank you. Where you start to do some cleanup and stuff. And one of the things that happens is this is the part of the game where you're going to start allocating that focus from your Warcaster to your Warjacks. But new rule is power up, right, Norbert? And this is one of those small changes that is really a game changer, I think. And what happens here is before you allocate focus, so you put your focus on your Warcaster, let's say it's Coleman Striker and he's got 6 focus, so he's at 6 focus. Before I allocate any focus, every Warjack that is in Striker's battle group, so that I, bought in the list for Striker, that is in his control radius, gets a free focus on the Warjack that does not come from Striker's pool. So already all my Jacks have a focus on them. That means if it's early game, and basically my Jack's job is to run forward, or something of similar, I don't need to put any extra focus on them. So now Striker's got all 6 focus for whatever else he wants to do, and even later games, I'm just got to find 2 more focus for the Jack that needs to go do some serious bashing. I think this is it totally drives the value of Jacks way up. Norbert, what's been your reaction to that? And
Absolutely, 100%. I'll give you another example. In the old days, you had to pay a focus to do any kind of power attack. So now, let's say you're just standing next to another model within walking distance of a model. You don't have to get the Warcaster involved if you want him to go over there, pick up the target, and throw him away from you, like using a throw. That's all. I mean, you could boost the attack to make sure it happens and all, but really, you can actually get the Warjack to go over and make a throw, essentially for no investment on your part. And that is a major swing, mechanic in the game. That does a lot that you can get now for free. So the self-sufficiency, they've just woken up the Jacks basically by having this extra focus. It's just like you said. It seems like a minor thing, and I think they said it in their designer notes. Like they, sort of this early on, and we're like, well, that's kind of too simple to fix things. But then the more they did it, they said this just kind of is elegantly waking up the Jackson. So they stuck with it really early on in their development of Mark III. Yeah,
I think that combined with when we get to Army List a little bit later, but they sort of upped. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think they did make the points much larger for games, and they upped the points of everything. So that's just sort of interesting for granularity. But I think the amount of free Jacks Warcasters come with now has been upped also. Is that right? I feel like that's
the amount of Warjack points that Warcasters get is is larger than it was in Mark II, and all the Jacks on average, if you looked at them from a Mark II perspective, are cheaper than they were. So it's a double whammy in terms of Jacks. You get a lot more for your money.
Yeah, and I think Craig, you ran into this, and my daughter Rose did too, which is she doesn't have enough War Beasts, and Craig didn't have enough Jacks painted up to field his caster without wasting some of that reserve, right? And so you're immediately like, I got to buy more Jacks. Right?
Well, Kalissa, who I took, went from 7 to 29, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, so you're looking at like most of your battle group is going to be free.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, when you buy the new battle boxes, as we probably mentioned before, the number of Jacks that come in there actually is just more or less the same amount of Warjack points they come with. So you start like with a 0-point army essentially right out of the box.
Right. That is, by the way, that's an official Army List size now.
Speaking of the throw also, I will say throwing and stuff was really cool, and it was neat. And I know that's a big selling point for Russ, that you get like every model every Jack can do this kind of thing if it's got the hands for it. It always was intimidating to me, and I almost never did it because I didn't want to look like an idiot and not know how it was done. And in that game that Russ and I played, the very first attack any Jack of mine ever made was a throw.
Nice.
And it was really cool, and it was really easy to figure out what happened, and it was really neat.
Yeah, they definitely simplified those rules too, which is nice also. Now, one other thing in the maintenance phase that changed, and this is more of a Warlock thing, and I also think, Norbert, this is part of the philosophy too. So one of the more, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you played many, many more Mark II games than I did, especially against a wider variety of armies. But one of the sort of the given assumptions of Mark II is that Warmachine is a late game when against Hordes, while Hordes is an early game because the Horde guys can immediately go in and drive their beasts to maximum and do lots of damage quickly. So what they did to resolve that was they gave the ability for Warlocks to get back Fury in the maintenance phase from dead, medium, or large based war beasts, right? So for every dead, medium, or large based war beast, your warlock recovers 1 fury. And so this encourages then the Hordes player to take lots of war beasts, because if you've got a 5 or 6 fury warlock and you take 5 or 6 war beasts, even if they're all dead, your warlock's fully functional, right? So I thought that was an interesting mechanic. Not quite as powerful as the power up, but it seems like it's a nice way to handle the whole Hordes gets weaker in the late game, right, Norbert?
Yeah, I mean, it's something is not as strong as, I mean, it helps the Hordes players out a little bit. I mean, but it wasn't as dramatic a change as the power-up one, but definitely helps them, because otherwise, towards the late game, they would just have to harm themselves to try to get Fury to be able to do something. So I think it's a nice little addition, maybe not as impactful or as a dramatic change as Warmachine, but definitely very welcome.
Yep. So that's the maintenance phase. There's some other minor changes in there for helping with timing and stuff, but that's the big stuff. Let's talk about the movement phase. There's not a lot of giant changes in the movement phase, but a couple of nuances in here I think are pretty interesting. One of them is, it's sort of a classic Privateer Press, help to refine the rules. So in Mark II, it always was if you didn't move in the movement phase and you shot in the shooting phase, you got +2 to hit bonus, right? And the fluff on that is you're taking the time to aim. But the problem with that is, if you've lost movement, for some reason, do you still get the aiming bonus? And what they've done now in Mark III is said that aiming is actually sort of an action you declare in the movement step, and you give up your movement to aim. And they've also made a rule very clear that if you've lost your movement, you can't give it up. So it makes it very clear now that if for some reason, if you're stationary or you're knocked down, you can't be aiming, right? Which I thought was a nice, very clear way to handle that.
Yeah, and I think that demonstrates exactly what was going on in a lot of Mark III. Is that it's the same rules, pretty much what you thought it was, but they've just cleaned it up even further than they did when they went from Mark I to Mark II.
Also, I think another theme in Mark III, Norbert, is the encouragement for maneuver, and I think another rule change that encourages that even more is how much easier it is to get rear shots or flanking attacks on your opponent. So in Mark II. Everybody knows that the Warmachine base's line of sight are the first 180 degrees off the model, and a lot of players paint lines on the edge of their bases so you can clearly see where that spot is. But in Mark II, you had to start your entire activation in the back arc of an enemy to get that +2 to hit attack from either melee or range attack, right? But in Mark III, as long as when you make the attack, your base is fully in their rear arc, you get the bonus to hit, right?
That's right.
And so what that means now is, it's much easier for a player who's near the back arc to just move across the line and shoot you in the back. And so now what you're finding is, and that +2, by the way, is huge. So now what you're finding is you really need to protect your flanks more, right? You need those units on the sides, or maybe fan your army out a little more to try to protect those rear arcs. Have you noticed that in practice, Norbert?
Oh yeah, much so. And some of the abilities in the game are triggered by being in the back arc, and so those have now become actually a lot more prominent. I think anyway. In the early days, it seems that way.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why they went with this rule, so that you would see more of the cool stuff get used. Yeah. But this was one change that I didn't like, more from a fluff perspective, because I liked the fact that in my head, it worked like realistically, because if you started behind them, they didn't know you were there. But if you didn't start behind them, they knew enough that they could shrug a shoulder or whatever. Whereas this is kind of like makes it feel less like it's an ebb and flow of a living battlefield and more of a static war game, which I always like seeing things go in the other direction rather than this. I understand it. It's not like a rule game breaker, or didn't make. I mean, I enjoyed the game way more than I have, so obviously it didn't make any big impact. But that was the one that was, from a fluffy way in my head, I didn't like quite as much as everything else.
Yeah, for me, the modifier is less about a surprise attack, which is what it felt like in the old edition, and now it's just you're surrounded and you can't be looking both ways at the same time, kind of thing. But in any case, I think it's welcome, and it does cause more dynamic maneuver, which always makes the game more interesting, I think. Now that's movement phase, and I think the only other thing you notice in movement is, again, I think pre-measuring just makes the movement phase cleaner. I don't know. Any other thoughts on movement, Norbert?
Just bring along proxy bases now, because you would be wanting to pop those down to where you want to move, or to see if you can move in between models and things like that. So having those are quite handy in addition to tape measure of some kind.
Yeah, I've noticed that being talked about a lot on the forums for competitive play, which is just a proxy base is just a base size object, usually thin, like a piece of wood or an unused base. And that way you can just lay it down to see if you'll fit, or if you're planning your maneuver, you can kind of check it out with it. I think that's kind of an interesting idea. I've never really tried that before. I think it's a cool way to try it out.
Yeah, when they mean pre-measurement, they literally mean you could put anything down to mark where you are, where you're going to go, and things like that.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's go on to range combat now. I think one of the biggest changes here is simply how rate of fire now works and how focus works on attack bonuses. So one of the things in Mark II and indeed Mark I, the deal was that you could spend a focus, a Jack could, to get an additional attack, be it ranged or a melee attack. The nuance to range attack was you couldn't exceed your total rate of fire. So if you had a gun with a rate of fire 2, you got 1 shot for free. You could spend a focus to take the second shot, and you could not spend a focus to take a third shot because rate of fire was 2. In Mark III now, they've changed it up. In the core rules, you can only spend focus for an additional melee attack. You may not spend focus for additional range attacks. And the rate of fire stat now indicates the number of shots that particular weapon gets for free when you take your initial attack action with that weapon, right?
Right. So if it says rate of fire 2 on the card now, that means you just get 2 free shots with it. And if it'll be on the back of the card, it'll have a special rule saying you can buy how many more attacks you could buy on top of that.
Yep. So typically, and not everybody has that. So like the Charger, which used to be, the Charger Jack for Signar used to be rate of fire 2, but that would require you spend a focus to shoot the second shot. Now the Charger just gets 2 shots, and you only need focus if you want to boost those attacks, which is really nice. I like this a lot, and now those high volume guns are much more. You don't have to worry about focus for them anymore, which I think is really interesting. What have you kind of noticed how people are playing that? Is it people get more excited about the high volume?
Well, first of all, I think it's easier to teach because now people look at the rate of fire, and that is the rate of fire that you'd expect. It doesn't have that weird, like you get one free, then you have to buy the rest kind of a thing. So it's just easier. The other thing I noticed is that they, sort of like Hearthstone, when they did one of their new edition releases, they added a lot more random elements to the game, which kind of like was different and caused some discussion in the community. Here in Mark III, you see quite a bit of random things, a little addition of random elements, and rate of fire is one of them. So some guns are D3, for instance. And so that was an interesting change because you hadn't seen that sort of stuff in Mark II as much before.
Signar always had it with their chain guns, so it's less of a noticeable thing for me. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think other factions picked it up too. But the chain guns always had D3 or D6 on the big ones.
Right.
So that's range combat. Not a lot of changes there, except that is kind of a big deal, right? Spending focus for range attacks was a big thing, and that's gone, which is interesting. But they've added it back in interesting ways. So particularly casters like Kane and stuff have special rules which state Kane can spend focus, and they'll have a limit too. Like Kane can spend focus for another shot up to 2 times a turn or 3 times. I can't remember what the rule is exactly, but other casters have this, which is sort of neat. Now, melee attacks. So melee combat is interesting. One of the things you notice right when you look at the cards is all melee weapons now have a range stat, right? And they've done away with reach. So reach as an icon is gone. In Warmachine, it used to be this. You had a 1/2 inch range of the melee attack, and it wasn't printed on the card. You just knew it from the core rules. Unless the model had reach, in which case it had a 2-inch melee attack, and that was pretty much the deal, right? But now in Mark III, they've really kind of simplified it, but also given themselves a lot more options. So reach is gone. There's a range now. Most weapons on small models are a 1/2 inch. Most weapons on jacks are 1 inch now. So jacks have a little more distance with their melee weapons. And then the models that used to have reach now typically have a 2-inch range. So you just look at your card, you see the range of your weapon, and now you can have models that have some weapons that are short range, a 1/2 inch, some weapons that are 1 inch, some other weapon that might be a 2-inch reach. Makes it for really interesting stuff now, and it makes your jacks feel bigger, I think, because they have that 1-inch reach. What do you think of that change, Norbert?
I think adding I think the drive was to try to give jacks to have more presence on the field, and so the half inch wasn't doing it for them, and so that was like kind of like the starting point. I don't know this, but I figure it's what people wanted, that they wanted like at least 1 inch on jacks as a default.
Yeah.
But then they took that extra step forward of adding that granularity and making it something on the card rather in terms of a range value rather than a symbol. And so it's really nice now because you get all kinds of variety in terms of the weapons across the game. And as you mentioned, the jacks do feel bigger because of the greater reach.
Yeah, I like this a lot.
Yeah.
Also, power attacks. They removed a few that nobody ever used, pretty much. And they simplified throws, as Craig mentioned. They're really easy to understand now. And so that's pretty straightforward. The other thing I think that was nice, and this used to bother me actually, Norbert, is that you can now move knockdown models. Particularly, you can slam a knockdown model. So in Mark II, you couldn't. And I found this really annoying because I have several jacks whose job it is to really push and slam models, but they might get lucky and knock you down. But it's not lucky if they knock you down, because if it's one of those missions where you're trying to move people off the objective and you get quote unquote lucky and knock them down, all of a sudden you're worse off because you can't keep moving them. In Mark III, it gets better because now you've knocked them down, you auto hit them, and you can still shove them around, which is great. So you can actually, and as Craig noticed, the missions now are very focused, even in the core rulebook, around moving models as much as it is around killing models. So, which makes the game really tactical and interesting. So really being able to move those knockdown models, I think, is a pretty big deal. What are your thoughts, Norbert?
Yeah, absolutely. It just is easier to explain again.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're looking at it, you don't understand why you wouldn't be able to move it. Plus, when you're looking at the models, you only usually have a little token to say that they're knocked down, so they don't, you know. So you may be like, oh, I'm going to keep moving that one or what have you, and then realize that you can't because it was knocked down. So that's kind of a bummer. So that's all gone.
Yeah,
easier,
which I really like a lot. So that's pretty much melee combat. The other thing Craig and I noticed though in our melee combat was,
bizarre. This one's bizarre for me.
This is interesting. I have mixed feelings about this one, Norbert. I want to get your thoughts. So one of the things I noticed right off the bat about one of my favorite units, one of the first units, actually the first unit I ever painted in Warmachine, was my gun mages. So I always, whenever I can squeeze them into a list, I take my gun mages, my arcane gun mages. And so I'm fighting Craig, and I noticed the gun mages now in Mark III, they've lost their ability to do combined fire.
Not to be confused with mundane gun mages.
They're not mundane. They're arcane. They're awesome.
I'm saying, not to be confused with mundane gun mages.
But anybody with a tri-corner hat is awesome. Okay, just saying. So
I'm surprised you don't have the Paul Revere unit.
I'm working on it. So I'm fighting. I actually do. I have the guys riding horses.
Oh, do you?
Cool. Yeah, the gun mages on the horse. I got to paint them up now because they're awesome now. So they got gunfighter. So one of Craig's got one of his annoying units over there. So I charged them, figuring gunfighter's going to be great, and we're killing each other off. And I'm like, well, Craig, you killed half my unit. I probably should make a morale check. Wait. I'm just going to go check out how morale works now in Mark III. Oh, it's not in the index. That's interesting. There's no command checks. Let me go see if I can. Oh my God, there's no command checks or morale checks anymore in Warmachine. So, I have mixed feelings about this because honest to God, whenever I play my daughter, we forget to do it. So I probably feel most people, unless you're a tournament player, probably forget about morale checks. So it's probably one of those things where as the designers clean the game up, they think about, well, this is a rule that no one remembers, so we'll just remove it. But I do generally like morale in my game, so I'm not sure how I feel about this. Norbert, what do you feel about the reasoning behind losing the rule, and how do you think it affects the game? And do you think it's bad for the game?
Yeah, it's hugely affects the game. Tournament players in particular were complaining about it because the big problem was that an entire unit could be wiped out, its ability to do anything could be wiped out for a turn based on a single die roll, which is what people didn't like. And in fact, some lists were designed to force the opponent to have to make multiple checks in a row on that, and so there's a higher chance of them losing the ability of function of a unit for a turn, which is big in a game that only has a few turns. So I think that was the impetus, that they wanted to get rid of that's such a pivotal thing. Now, you would have thought that maybe what it was is that if you failed a morale check, you might have just a couple of negatives, like some negative modifiers to kind of weaken you or something like that. That would have been probably the more like what you would assume they would go, but they went wholesale. They didn't want the game to be about that. They wanted people always to have a more heroic game, more epic kind of game, and so people should always be able to do stuff. And so they just got rid of it altogether. So, it is definitely, I know where you're coming from. It feels different. And so, whether it's good or not, I don't know. We just haven't played enough games to really say. But I mean, I think it's definitely been a welcome thing by most of the competitive community.
Greg, what do you think of the loss of morale?
I don't like it. I don't like it because now it makes it more math and less, to me, a story.
Sure.
Because now I'm going to have to grind down your entire unit before I can go on to do something else, which I can totally see how that's going to fit into, a tournament player who's going to be matrix. It's a matrix gamer thing, right? You know exactly how long that unit's going to last because I'm going to have to hit and kill and blah, 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 blah. And even if you've got one guy left, I'm not going to be able to ignore him. So you're going to be able to like slowly grind down on that side as opposed to I'm looking for the heroic Hail Mary, bam, 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 bam. Oh, and then he ran away, or they cower one turn, or whatever they do. And so it takes away from the story side and adds to the Matrix side for me, which I don't like in any game that does that. So this, to me, was I understand why they did it. It caters to a particular mindset that is not my own.
Yeah. The only thing, I totally understand that. And like I said, I thought they would try to just weaken the effects of it. But the only thing I'll add to that for the listeners is that in general, infantry across the game has been toned down in its abilities, like what it can do. And they're far easier to kill now because they've really tried to push the Warjack and War Beast as being the premier part of the game, which I love. You mentioned like having to grind down a unit. These days, it's a lot easier to do that. So maybe that's then okay if you follow me.
Maybe it wasn't in our game because it was infantry on infantry.
Okay.
The one battle where that came into play. So I thought, So I mean, I understand, and I would have liked to see maybe I need a nod in this direction for me, or it just like play chess. That's where this kind of heads in that which again they have a huge successful player base that they need to cater to, and that's what they're doing. So it's not. I don't like it. I understand it. It makes perfect sense. The fact I don't dislike it because I think it's a wrong rule. I just think it takes a game that's not really quote unquote my game anyway, and moves it a little further out of the column where it might have been my game, I guess.
Okay. I was like, new edition. Finally, this is my moment to get Craig fully engaged in this game now. And I thought we're going there, but here's a little snag. So
it's a slight snag. It's not, but then again, I mean, you and many other people have recently told me over the last week that Retribution is an army that can still use a lot of its infantry.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I guess if my infantry is still strong, then I guess I will benefit from this rule more than see like the bad side of it, but I like the fluffy story driven part of me is still wishes there was some nod in that direction. I mean this one rule wouldn't make me not play the game.
Gotcha. Okay, good. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think I like some nod to morale, but I do say though nowadays that I don't like morale anymore. That's a single die roll. I like where it's going in more modern war games where morale is handled by, volume of fire and pins and other things like bolt action and Antares and dust and other things are doing much, much, much better. So it's almost like
more where the unit degrades rather than disappears.
It's almost like they've kind of said, you know what, we don't really do it right anymore, so we're just going to take it out. And I guess that's an okay way to do it, but I do miss it. In that particular battle, it was kind of weird watching those two units just kind of go down to the last man standing each. I mean, I guess it's a story where the two sides just fight to the death, but at the same time, it'd be nice to see one side break and then the unit get freed up to do something else.
Yeah.
That's always the danger when you do simplify rules. It always makes it easier, a smoother game from a mechanical point of view. But do you take out all the flavor?
Yep.
So you have to decide.
I don't know if it didn't. It's not. I don't think it's as glaring as we're making it sound, but it's there.
No, it's not. It's only going to be on certain occasions where you're going to see it.
Right. So one other thing that changed that does simplify the game that I actually like is this concept of skill checks are gone. Right. So here's a classic one. So my storm callers, right? Favorite unit, they're these little solo dudes that run around, call lightning on you. And when they call lightning on you, instead of making a regular attack, they used to have this, it would be like, storm call, and it'd be brackets 8. And so on 2d6, if I could roll 8 or less, the attack, the event was successful, right? The spell or whatever, the skill was successful. Well, they've done away with that. And so now, most of those things have been converted into traditional attacks, or it might have a magic attack on it, but it tells you the magic skill level of the caster, who is maybe not a warcaster, for example. And that just tells you that it's similar as Rat or Mat. It's like a spell casting ability you add to the 2d6 you roll. So they got rid of that whole thing. I think that's a welcome change, because those skill checks were it was sort of a weird sort of side mechanic that
it was
I don't think
and it was a frustrate. It was a little barrier of frustration.
Yeah. The reason I included it is because it makes repairs on Warjacks now possible. That repairability of Warjacks was always in the game, but people didn't used to use those models because you had to first make the skill check and then you had to randomly roll how much you repaired. So now you could count on it repairing at least a little bit. And furthermore, because there are so many jacks, and repairing is actually a much more interesting and important mechanic as a result. And so it's kind of like getting rid of skill checks is like magnifying the ability that now exists because warjacks are so much more prevalent. Right. So I really like it from that point of view.
So that's range, melee. We've covered morale and skill. I told you there's not that many changes. There's a lot of little ones that make a big difference. Here's another little one that makes a big difference, I think. So the warcasters, they really changed how, what we used to say was camping on focus, right? So the idea is when your turn ends, it's kind of important to think about how much focus, or indeed fury, you're leaving on your warcaster or warlock. Now in Mark 2, and in actually Mark 1 also, right? Your whatever focus you had left on your warcaster, sort of powered up his defense shield that goes around his, armor, and it would then add +1 arm for each focus he was on. So if he's sitting on 3 focus, his armor's now +3. So Striker goes from 15 armor to 18 armor, which is pretty good. But now it's different. So now instead, your focus on your warcaster doesn't do anything for your armor. And instead, whenever you get attacked, you can spend 1 focus to reduce the damage from that attack by 5. Right?
Yep.
This makes it feel a lot more like a warlock, right?
Yep.
So warlocks always had an advantage here, because instead of adding to their armor, what they could do is they could spend their fury and transfer they could transfer all the damage of the attack for 1 point of fury onto one of their war beasts. Now the war beast took the damage, and when you run out of war beast, you can't do that anymore. But that allowed them to soak, huge amounts of damage. You hit a warlock for 10, and he just transfers over all 10 of it to his war beast, and he's fine. This gives the warcasters not the same as the warlock, but it's a pretty nice deal. How do you think this has affected the game so far, Norbert?
The big change, because all the math that's gone into competitive players' heads is now completely upended.
Right.
Because it's a whole different math that you have to start thinking about. And it's better because I think what they wanted to get rid of were warcasters that could really bully the table by just sitting there on a huge stack of focus and people not be able to do anything against them, or very little against them. Now that's not possible anymore. And now it's a matter of weathering volumes of attacks, because you can run out of the focus as you're spending it.
I think it's awesome because you're right. Exactly. It lets you weather a couple big attacks, no problem still. Well, not no problem, but either a massive attack, you can only take 5 points off. So if someone hits you really, really hard for 30 points of damage or something ridiculous, you're only taking 5 off it, so it still hurts. And B, you're right, lots of niggling fire. You're either letting 2 or 3 points through a shot, or you're wasting all your focus on those small shots, and then you don't know when the big one's going to get you, right? So you got both those problems. But also, I think, to Craig's point earlier, it feels more story-like. I imagine the warcaster powering his field in a burst at just the right moment, and it repels the attack. It's more visual to me than just my shield's humming at a higher level. You know what I mean? I don't know. It makes it more like a dynamic action to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes a lot more decisions. Now, you have to really decide how much you want to keep on there and then whether to spend it, just like you used to as a warlock. So, it's a big, again, very simple change, but very big for the game.
Yeah. So that's really the big stuff in the core rules, but there's a few other things in the special rules section we should probably highlight, because these are sort of rules that appear in, if not every game, most games you play in, right? So one of them is, and I didn't even catch this the first time I played it until I really reread the rules, toughness changed a lot, right?
Yes.
And it's a subtle change, and actually I really, really like this. even as a troll player, I'll suck it up because I like how this works now. So how tough used to work, for those who may not remember, whenever a model took its last wound of damage and was about to die, if it was a tough model, and there's a little icon for this, you rolled a D6, and on a 5 or 6, instead of dying, the model was simply knocked down. And if the model was already knocked down, you could still make those toughness saves. And if you got lucky, one model could absorb as much fire as you threw at it. And as long as he kept rolling a 5 or 6, hey, you just can't kill me. They've changed this now so that tough is the same except to the part where you get knocked down. And if a model is knocked down, toughness no longer applies. So you basically can soak one shot, get knocked down, and now there's no more toughness checks. The next wound's going to kill you. What's even more interesting is it gives your opponents of tough armies, especially Craig. This is one of the ones with the units in it. So this would be really tough if there's no morale anymore and you've got to go kill an entire unit of tough models. That could be a very tall order depending on how well your opponent rolls. But let's say you had a spell or a guy or some other way to knock guys down proactively. Like let's say it's Striker with Earthquake, and you Earthquake the unit of trolls first and then lead them to a machine guns. They're just going to be dead. Right? So there are tactical options for you if you know you're going up against trolls or other armies, a lot of tough models. There are ways that you can now tactically deal with this threat as opposed to just before praying your opponent rolled bad, right?
Right.
Which I like a lot.
It just irons out a lot of the randomness of the game, which people really don't like typically. And so now you can count on it, even if the guy toughs, you can count on, if you really want to kill him, that it needs at least 2 shots.
Yeah.
Or two hits, whatever.
So I kind of feel like I like that change. As a troll player, I gotta really rationalize. Now I say this as a troll player who never made his tough saves. So, I don't know if that'll miss it that much. I do remember a couple great moments where Madrick, made his tough save and then was knocked down and then made it again and again. There was a couple moments where I really frustrated my opponent because they couldn't kill my my warlock in that mode. So, that's definitely going to be welcome for them. I mean, that's, you go all in, try to kill that warlock, and the guy just gets lucky. And just because, and I think the other thing too, Norbert, wasn't there sort of a critique that troll players never really paid for tough? Like the point value, point for point, if you look at the points of a troll unit compared to other units, even in Mark II, it was hard to see where the points for tough were going. Like the units seemed on par even with that tough. Is that sort of a fair thing?
You're troll players. So what else are you going to say?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
I say that wasn't as big a deal as the randomness being such a nuisance.
I think it's really the random thing. Now, one other change, I thought this was really interesting, and I want to get your take on this, Norbert. They changed how Jack Marshal works. And I feel like this is more story than anything else, but maybe there's some things here. So Jack Marshalling used to essentially be a Jack Marshal could kind of do what a Warcaster would do. You just pick one thing and you don't use Fury. So you kind of say, I'll boost my attack, or I'll run and I'll charge, or whatever. But now they've given the Jack Marshal sort of, 3 or 4 unique orders. None of them are really as good as what the Warcaster can do, but they're all sort of unique, right?
Yeah, and better than what they used to be able to do. So basically, the Jack Marshal can get their Jacks to do just much more. Just similarly to how Power Up has been helping Jacks in the battle group of the Warcaster.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that some Jack Marshals have special ability that kind of their Jack gets. And in the old days, you used to have to, again, roll essentially a skill check to see if it actually took place that turn. Mm-hmm. And that's gone now. So long as it's in the command range of the Jack Marshal and they're not knocked down or stationary, the Jack just gets that special ability, which is great. It's just what you wanted.
So the Jack Marshals, I think, they were okay before. I think they're solid now, but they also it still feels like the war. I like the words, like they added crush and hurry, because it was always in the fluff that the Jack Marshal gave them commands verbally. And so now I love that. That's sort of the flavor being in the rules, where it actually is like you can imagine your Marshal yelling crush, or whatever. So that's pretty cool. I like how that worked out. Another great change I think really simplifies the game a lot is how they adjusted cavalry.
Cavalry. This is a huge one, actually.
This is a great change. So before they had light cav and heavy cav, and the rules were different, and you kind of had to understand the differences. And now they've gotten rid of all that. There's just cavalry. And then some cavalry has a special rule in the back of its card with I think it's called reposition, right? And that's got a number next to it for how far they can reposition. So basically, all cavalry now has impact attacks. All of them, have mount attacks, but then some of them have reposition on the end. So if you want to create light cav, all you do is put a special rule in the back of their card that everybody can read and understand. And if you want to make heavy cav, you don't put a reposition rule in the card, or you do, but make it a smaller number than the light cav, right?
Yep, that's it exactly.
And
so,
I love this because now I can never remember all the differences between there was ride by attacks and not. That's all gone, and so it was very complex. It was cool, but it was complicated. Now it just seems very simple and easy to remember.
Yep. Yeah, much easier to do the things that they should be doing. And as you said, you just look at the card now, and you know exactly how they differ from one type of cavalry to another.
Yep. So that's a nice change. They got rid of wreck markers. Which is an interesting get rid of. I've heard stories of tournament players who kill their own jacks just to create, defense positions for their warlocks and warcasters or whatever. But
that's right.
Which was a game breaking thing. But also, it also equalizes Warmachine and Hordes, right? Because Hordes didn't leave them and Warmachine did, which can be pro or con depending on who you are. But don't throw those wreck markers away. I was using them as flag markers for a mission.
Yeah.
And Craig and I were, and it was funny because we were using them as a mission. I took some pictures and I'm tweeting, hey, look, it's my first Mark III game with Craig. And I got all these responses saying, well, actually, there's no wreck markers in Mark III. So, and I'm like, oh, we're using them as flags. It's okay. So, one other subtle change, eyeless sight doesn't see through forests anymore. This is interesting.
Yeah. I mentioned that because that was a huge, hallmark of the Legion faction, for the most part, and it was something that really frustrated a lot of opponents because they just they ignored a lot of rules, and so now they still ignore most of the same sort of things as before, but except for the fact that they can no longer see through forests like they used to.
Terrain is more effective now, which is I don't know if it's more effective. Terrain is as important as ever, if not more so than before.
More so. I would say definitely more so.
Frenzy, simpler, but also they got rid of terror. They got rid of all the psychology stuff, basically, out of the game.
Frenzying used to be like a checklist where you have to decide who the beast would actually attack, and it was kind of complicated. And I used to have a little cheat sheet with me to remember it even. And now it's simply, it was because it was like a. Anyway, there was a whole bunch of one thing after another. You had to double check if it got complicated. But now it's simple. It merely charges the nearest model, regardless friend or foe, and boosted damage rolls onto it. So much easier for everybody involved to decide who it's supposed to attack when it frenzies.
So I think I think that's pretty much the core rule changes, right, Norbert? So
yeah, there's little tweaks here and there, but those are the main ones that are going to affect your gameplay when you're playing Mark III.
So there's not a lot of changes. I mean, it's not a ton, but there's enough that you definitely want to kind of watch the rules. It's pretty easy to remember. I mean, if you only remember three things, remember you can pre-measure, remember power up for warjacks, and remember your focus now is remove 1 for 5 damage reduction. That's kind of like the core. If you're not doing those things, you're missing some of the big changes. But the other big change is that read your cards. Read every single spell, read every rule, read everything, because they are very different for down to every single model. Like Stormsmiths have to use their rat now. I mean, everything's different. And we can't obviously go through all the card changes here. But there were, I think, a few I'm noticing, and I'm curious your take on this, Norbert. I'm noticing a few sort of philosophies, I think, that were applied as they went through all these cards. One of them was, I think I've noticed several of the units have had their defense reduced. Like their super high defense is less common. Is that something you're noticing?
Oh, absolutely. Infantry in particular. And this is contributing to what I was saying about how infantry is easier to kill nowadays. Defenses definitely seems to have gone down.
And I also think lowering defense might be a little bit easier. Like I was personally the recipient of this because Doppler bark is freaking awesome now.
Yeah. Oh boy. Great ability.
but that's a great way to take out a whole unit of infantry, right? You run your dog in there, Doppler bark, everything within 2 inches is now defense 5, and boom, you just hit them with just shoot them all or whatever.
Sure.
So there's a lot of I feel like there's more of that, like there's a bit of more of that running around. I also noticed, and Craig, I think you noticed this too. I used to have a lot more options in my army to be able to ignore stealth, and it seems to all be gone. So
I don't remember having a lot of that, but that's okay with me.
Didn't you have a spell on your one Warcaster that's gone now that ignores
stealth? Oh, that's right. Yeah,
so
I did.
I feel like stealth might be getting more effective because I feel like there's less opportunities to get around to just blatantly ignore it. I don't know, Norbert, have you noticed that?
I see what you mean. I think it's all shifted around because Kador, for instance, has gotten some things that can ignore stealth here and there, but it's not prominent. So stealth is definitely still as effective an ability as it's ever been. Maybe some things that you're used to getting rid of it, though, are no longer there, and maybe other things have gotten it. I mean, in general, like you were saying, if as much as the rules were subtly changed and so therefore quite different, but subtly changed, you're right. There's been loads of card changes and models just work differently than they have in the past.
They're all new. I mean, the casters are all. I mean, Striker is largely unchanged, but like Kaya is subtly but majorly changed, and other little things too. And now that I talked to you about this, Norbert, off the air a little bit, I think that I may have found the only example of this anywhere, but one thing I noticed is immediately on the Stormcallers, in Signar, Stormcallers were originally solos. 1 point in Mark II, you could run them around, and the more of them you had, the better they got, because they could, draw lines between each other and zap you, or draw triangles and zap you, but you could take one. Now, you have to take them in 3-packs. The card it's 5 points for 3 of them. I don't know. They're still solos. They still operate independently, but you buy them in 3s. I don't know if there's other examples of this, but I thought that was an interesting little catch-all, or little thing for Signar. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that in their factions, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know of any other examples, but I haven't looked at everything at all.
Before we move on for cards, Norbert, do you have a couple examples of some subtle changes that have big impact for maybe some of your favorites characters?
So I play Kador now, which was my original faction, and the Behemoth is a model. It has ranged guns in it, and it was always a good model, but now it's gotten even better because it's gotten powerful. It's attack, I think it's called. But basically, for one focus, it boosts both the attack roll and the damage roll for the gun. Mm-hmm. So again, making it a lot more efficient as a jack than before, which has been really excellent. The small jacks that Dwarven casters can run, which are colloquially called gun bunnies, have the same sort of rule. So now these very cheap jacks with really powerful guns just need one focus to boost their attack and damage rolls. And as we've been saying, you get that focus for free now, at least one. So they basically are shooting at full efficiency just out of the box. So those are 2 examples, just amazing.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. The other thing is this battle mechanics is a unit that never saw a lot of play in Mark II, and now you see them all the time because they can repair their jacks automatically, and they do a fair amount of damage, or repair a fair amount of damage to them, and you have a lot more jacks on the table. So I'm seeing a lot of those now run around on the tables, which has been really exciting.
Yep. And I gave some examples of Circle. I mean, Doppler bark on those Arguses is now off the chain. I can't imagine not seeing a lot of those dogs running around. Kaya, her feet had a slight change, which is now awesome. So before, her feet was always, she could immediately refocus from everybody. So what you would do is you'd activate all your war beasts first, get them all riled up. Then you'd send Kaya in, maybe on an assassination run. She'd make all of her attacks. Then she'd pop her feet, reave all of her focus, and make more attacks. Now she's even nastier because when she pops her feet, if her war beasts aren't at maximum focus, you can drive them to maximum focus. Fury. Then you can reave it. Then she can cast Spirit Door, bring those war beasts in who haven't activated yet. And now with Spirit Door, before in Mark II, you'd give up your whole you could just come in Spirit Door and do nothing. In Mark III, you have to give up your movement, but you can still attack. But her Spirit Door was reduced in that she can now only Spirit Door to a war beast or have a war beast Spirit Door to her. But what she did on the assassination run to Striker, which was just awesome to me, I thought I was safe because I thought Spirit Door was all toned down, so I wasn't even worried about it. I didn't catch the language that you can attack after you do it. So she runs the dog, the Argus up to Striker. Doppler barks, so Striker went from defense 16 to defense 5. Then Kaya Spirit Doors in, next to the dog, she's now within 1 inch of Striker, and she's got her staff. Beats Striker down as many times as she can. Striker's down to like 8 wounds. Then she's out of focus. A Fury. Then she pops her feet when none of her war beasts near her have activated, so she jacks them all up to max, brings her Fury in. Now she's at maximum Fury. She, instead of hitting Striker again, cast Spirit Door 2 more times, bringing in a Megalith and a Warp Wolf on top of Striker next to her. And then the Megalith and the Warp Wolf, since they haven't activated yet, and now they're clean of Fury because she just took it off, now have all of their Fury attacks on Striker, who's defense 5 and got 8 wounds left, and you can imagine how that ended. So that was something that was not possible at all in Mark II. But again, she has to risk Kaya to do that. If I had known how Doppelbark and everything worked out, I could have avoided that. But it's different, but it's not worse. It's just different. So it's a whole new,
it's different.
It's a whole new game, right? It's a whole new game.
Yeah, it's a whole new game. If you had a bunch of models or units in your case that you haven't used in Mark II, haven't looked at in a while, definitely take a look at their cards and see how they've changed. Because chances are they do something quite different than they used to.
Yeah. So I think we've already hinted at how the army lists have changed and everything. So I want to skip ahead to, before we get to our final thoughts, and just a quick comment on the scenarios and missions now. So for those of you who maybe never looked at the Steamroller missions, or the official tournament play missions from Privateer Press and only looked at the missions in the Warmachine and Hordes original books, you never really found the true joy of playing Warmachine, I don't think. Because they really fixed a lot. Fixed implies it's broken. They really enhanced the experience with some of the things they innovated on in the Steamroller events. And what's cool now is those ideas have been brought straight into the core missions and scenarios that are described now in the new Prime and Primal rulebooks. Some of the things I think are brilliant is the asymmetric deployment for first and second player. So player 1 has a 7-inch deployment zone, and player 2 has a 10-inch deployment zone. So player 1, while they get advantage of first turn, has a slight distance disadvantage, which is a nice compensator. And secondly, almost all the missions, except I think one, involve some kind of objective or zone you need to control. And this means that while caster kill is still a very viable option, you really want to control those zones, and maneuvering is hugely important. And models that cause pushing and maneuvering are very, very valuable, as Craig found with his battle mages, who can push and pull models and can really control the table, which was huge. And I found with my Hammersmith, who can also push models around with every strike of his hammers. And you really can, it's almost, and the two-handed throws and everything else are valuable. So moving models are almost as valuable as killing them. And so it really makes for a very interesting dynamic game. And it's about much, much more than just, can I penetrate his armor and do the maximum wounds I can do? What do you think about those missions, Norbert? Is that fair to say that the Steamroller missions are really the way to play Warmachine, and this is now makes them core of the game?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've forgotten about the ones in the book. But you can't really play the game to its full potential without a scenario involved. Steamroller used to be the primary way that people would play that, and I think that will still be the case. But as you mentioned, the scenarios that they've included in the core rulebook mimic the ones that are in Steamroller. They're not quite the same, but they're pretty close. And so I would definitely recommend using any one of the ones in the book to play the game, because things will not work well without the pressure of a scenario kind of influencing the game.
Yeah. Well, cool. So that's pretty much all the changes to Warmachine. Now, I don't think we've played enough games to do a full review here, but I think we should give our final thoughts. So, Craig, do you want to go first with your final thoughts? What do you think now of Mark III Warmachine now that you've got a game under your belt and you've listened to us talk about all the changes here for about an hour?
Well, I enjoyed my game with you. I enjoyed it a lot. And I was enjoying it when I thought I was losing, and I was enjoying it slightly more when I won. It felt more cinematic to me. It was definitely faster. Like, as an example, the throw was much simpler to figure out and seemed like a much more accessible option to me. I enjoyed the way that the cinematography felt in the way that the game looked and flowed. I think it's a strong game when you can win, even though you took more casualties by mission. And that's basically what happened. I mean, you decimated one of my units. You completely crushed one of my big giant Jack, or Myrmidon, excuse me. And because I had the pieces where I wanted them, basically very seldom do I have an idea and it goes to plan and it win, and it, like, usually I'm kind of like just going along and hoping for the best. And in this game, I had very few units because we were playing a small game. So I kind of had a chance to familiarize myself with the units and familiarize myself with the mission. and I used the units the way I thought they should be used within the mission, and they worked exactly how I anticipated that they would work within, the restrictions of luck. Sometimes things didn't quite go my way, like my Myrmidon being crushed in one turn. And yet at the same time, that was a strategic choice that Russ made that kind of cost him in the long run because it pulled him out of position, which is, another little side thing that I had hoped might happen. So I really had fun. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking at putting together the few jacks that the last time this game made a resurgence locally, I bought a bunch of models and the resurgence died off before I could even put them together. So right now I have a bag full of models from the War Store that have been hanging in my garage for a couple of years now, if not longer. And I plan on putting those together, and maybe just the jacks right now because I have more than enough infantry. And I would love to play Russ and I are planning another game tomorrow. I would really love it if more people got to play it. And this is this might put it in perspective for people. 40K, for a variety of reasons, is making a local resurgence, a little minor local resurgence, as our local Matt from the Nerd Herders has been brought into 40K Radio as one of the new hosts.
Okay.
I would rather play my friends with this new Warmachine than get brought back into Warhammer 40,000.
Wow.
Oh, that is a big deal.
I am in. Wow, mission accomplished. Holy mackerel.
Which isn't to say that I don't still love 40K fluff.
Sure.
But for right now, the aesthetic, it's weird because and I think it has a lot to do with the work that I did on 40K at Fantasy Flight kind of burnt me out as far as the aesthetic and the story and that universe went. And so I would really enjoy it if a few more of our friends jumped on this bandwagon. I know, like, Rafe is very excited to get some games in, although with his schedule, he pre-schedules himself up the river without a paddle to the point now where he's like, oh, well, I hope to, but I can't game for the next 3 weeks. So that's not really something that would help me sustain my interest in a game. But hopefully if a few other people jumped in as well, I would enjoy if this became a regular game that we played a lot.
Wow.
Hey, well, if you want to lose to a 13-year-old girl, I can help you out.
Well, there you go. Yeah, lose. Yeah, exactly. She's terrifying.
I'm telling you, man.
She's got that flat, soulless gaze. I couldn't do that. She just crushes you with that little half smile on her face.
Right. So Norbert, what do you think? What do you think? Well, Craig, that's awesome, and I think it does speak volumes.
Yeah, I'm so happy. Wow.
So Norbert, what do you think of the Mark III? Is it everything?
I just wanted Norbert's life to be a little brighter given the geopolitical realities he's dealing with right now.
I've almost forgotten them as a result of this conversation.
And then anyway, I loved it. It was great. Don't turn on the news tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, we just have such a long history. I mean, Craig, I got to know you because of the show, and one of the first things was Warmachine. That was Mark I, and met up in the team tournament in New England, and then the Mark II edition came through. We talked about that, and now here we are on Mark III, and wow, that's great news. I'm really glad to hear it because, I love the game. Obviously, I still love it, as I mentioned in other parts of the show. Reshaking up all the cards primarily is really kind of just changed the entire game. It's a whole new game. I've painted new jacks as a result of that. New people are getting involved in it. If you played the game and put it down for a while, I can't recommend enough to try it again because it's changed substantially. That it isn't unfamiliar, but yet an entirely different experience. And so you might like it better now. And if you haven't played it before and have only heard about it, now is the time to get involved because everybody's on the same level right now. Everybody's trying to figure out what combinations are good, what models are good, and learning the rules. And so now's the time to get into it. So there is going to be some, I'm sure, as something as big as this, there's going to be some adjustments by Privateer Press. They've already promised that they would give active errata out and make updates when needed to make sure everything gets fixed the way they want it to be. And with the digital rule books out for free, those can be changed to match those errata. And if you play with War Room, their app, those cards will be immediately changed in the electronic version. And then every year they're going to release just physical cards that have been amended, so you can always update your collection that way as well. So I'm very pleased and excited to have a new way to play in Mark III.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. I think it's I'm loving it. It's not so different that it's a whole new world. I don't know if it's quite a whole new war, but it's definitely everything works the way you've always wanted it to, I think. And I've always wanted big giants, warjacks, kicking butt and taking names, and I feel like now I can take a big mob of them and not feel like I'm playing it wrong, meaning I'm not building the optimized list or whatever. So I love that part of it. I love the simplification. Not sure about morale, but I can live with it if it gives me a faster playing game. And I love, I've really fallen in love with the Steamroller tournament. I was telling this story off the air. My daughter, when we were playing Mark II and playing missions out of the book, she was starting to get a little bit, just sort of like, oh, it's one of those. And then we started playing the Steamroller missions just to mix it up, and she fell in love with the game all over again. She loved the objectives. She loved having to dig in and get close and push people around, and it really adds a whole new dimension. And that's when you start discovering power attacks and everything else, when you got to get guys off the objective or out of the mosh pit or whatever you're doing. So, I really think it adds a whole new level. We didn't even talk about this. They also add a lot of great story elements. There's actually a discussion of narrative campaigns in there, and they added a lot of new terrain types too, like burning earth and acid pools and other cool things. And terrain in general is more encouraged on the tabletop than it was in Mark II. So getting some cool looking tables with lots of cool, terrain on there and really heavily loaded tables is encouraged in the new edition as well, which I think they're going to support more narrative as well as more competitive play. And that would be welcome. I think appealing to the players who aren't all about high competitiveness would be great, because there's players like Craig and I out there who, aren't as necessarily interested in really super competitive play, but really like the game, how it unfolds and watching the story unfold on the tabletop. And I'd love to find more people who are interested in playing Warmachine that way. So,
yeah, you're right about that. They've actually written those terrain rules not only to have competitive pieces to train in, but actually to have more general type terrain rules that you can then take whatever piece that you happen to have in your collection and assign rules to it, essentially. And for somebody like Craig, who's got a whole host of different kind of interesting terrains and or narrative type things, I think he'd be able to put whatever he wanted on the table and then find rules to make it work in the system.
Yeah,
cool.
We did actually. It worked great. So it's awesome. So I love it. I think Mark III is great, and definitely exactly what Norbert said. If you haven't tried it in a while, now's the time. And if you've been a Warmachine fan for a while and were nervous they broke something in Mark III, don't be nervous. It's all good. So Norbert, thank you so much. It's so great to have the Prime Minister of Warmachine and Hordes join us on our little show here. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy geopolitical schedule to visit us here across the pond. So, so thank you. If folks want to find out more about what you're up to or get involved in one of your events, that you run many of those events over there in Europe, how do they find out more about Norbert?
Oh, sure. So Twitter is always a good way to do it. And my handle on Twitter is at 45, so the number 4 and the number 5, Caliber Idea. So you can find me there. My name is Dr. Norbert on there. And Cross Gaming Club is my local club. So if you want to come and play, we play near just south of London Bridge a little bit, and we do tournaments at Dark Sphere, which is near Waterloo. So those are two things that people can get a hold of me via the Cross Gaming Club forums.
Awesome. Well, Norbert, thank you so much for taking time and joining us. Really appreciate it. And we promise we'll have you on the show again before Mark IV comes out.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It's been a fun ride. I mean, it was 4 years ago, almost to the exact same time 4 years ago when I moved to London, and we had a little show talk about my experiences in moving, and so now we had Mark III. So it's always nice to check in with you guys, and I really
got to be less than 4 years.
I know, that's ridiculous.
Well, I'm happy to be any time helping out on the show. You guys are doing a great job.
All right, we'll put you on the short list, Norbert. All right, thank you so much, Norbert. Have a great one.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye now.
This, if you ever notice, is brought to you by all of our fine friends over at Patreon. And of course, we started the list and it went alphabetical by first name. So today we're talking about Adam Pitzer again, Adam Reeve, Adam Richards, and that's the end of the Adam Club. Now we're going on to Alan, just plain Alan, kind of like Prince. Too soon. And Alex Coombs. Thanks, guys. Thank you for checking out. It looks like we have the Alex Club coming up next episode. Seriously, thank you guys for checking out the video if you suffered through it, and for jumping on the bandwagon and helping us out. Every pledge counts and helps towards keeping the show going, and keeping us going to the cool things that we can go to that allow us to talk about the things we talk about and meet the people we meet and bring them onto the show. So thank you. Do you ever notice how hard it is to motivate in a vacuum? My writing over the past 6 months has been strange. I finished editing the Legacy of Shadow, and that was very exciting. Finished that, and then took time to do the Extra Life short story, and that was exciting. Although nobody bought it, but that's okay. And then of course the play took over, and then it was the holidays. Right around that time in the fall, when I was finishing up with that I had just finished the short story, actually. I had decided to, I don't know exactly what to do, where to go. I'm very happy with where I am right now. It looks like everything is going slowly, but in my direction, and I'm enjoying it and appreciating it. But at the same time, this is not something I could do long term and do early retirement or anything like that. And I don't know, maybe I'm not good enough to justify that. So I don't know. I really don't know. And of course, as I've said before, the creative personality I feel most often is really self damaging. Your own worst critic. 90% of the time. And so I don't know. I'm not sure. So my wife actually pushed me out on a limb, and I sent a bunch of samples to someone very highly placed in the publishing industry, and they liked what they saw. However, they couldn't help me because I didn't have a completed, unbespoke novel, and they needed a novel. They needed the full novel to work with, to look at, to decide, make any decisions, and then to help me with. And so I got all excited and said, "Oh, I'll have that done for you by May," assuming that I could write at the normal pace. Except that now I'm not writing to a contract. I'm not writing, in the warm embrace of this small, tight-knit community. I was writing to launch this thing out into God knows where and have God knows what happened to it. And kind of like, how many times were the Harry Potter books denied, right? And so one wouldn't be that big a deal, but it would be a big blow if it didn't go well. And so I procrastinated, and then I ended up taking jobs that I never would have taken in the last 5 years, all that I enjoyed, actually, and had a lot of fun, and one of them might even grow into something more, which would be cool. That was another thing that expanded over the last month or so, but I just could not get this outline for this, and they wanted a fantasy book, which is ironic because Wing Tassar said I should write a fantasy book next also. Vince was adamant in my trying to stretch my my limits. So here I am with a cool idea that I've pitched on multiple levels, and I've had really good responses, and I needed an outline. And normally an outline would take me about a week. And this outline, I finished it like a week ago, and it's in June now. So I have been procrastinating. It has been awful. I've been doing all these other projects to avoid doing this. Subconsciously, my wife knew what was going on, but I had no clue. And so I couldn't do it. And I kept thinking, like, why? Like, I'm the guy who's always championing, there's no such thing as, you got to work through writer's block. You can't just sit there. And I sat there. I mean, I didn't sit there and stare at a blank screen. I always had something good to do, like something really important that needed to be done. And it was brutal. And recently, I've started to get really good feedback from Legacy of Shadow, which was awesome. And then someone asked for Legacy of Shadow as sort of as a writing sample for a major project. So now I'm all nervous again. So I don't know exactly what's going on or what's happening. I now have a full outline. I'm very excited. I gave it to a couple people that I trust, and they had some really good feedback. So I think I have a really solid outline for a really neat fantasy story. I don't have any character names. That's another thing that I've procrastinated on. So I have to come up with all of those, and I need to start writing this book because luckily nothing has, like, I could have had things surface and be like, oh, nope, you got to write a book this summer. Nobody else came to me and told me I had to write a book this summer. So, but this is what they call writing on spec, or working on spec, meaning speculation that it might be picked up. And it's a different, frightening, exciting, but frightening place to be. And it's not some place I'm used to. And it's requiring me to come up with all kinds of new work habits that I don't normally have. Like I'm just not, excuse me, still not good. Just not used to, working like this is really working in a vacuum. But anyway, so that's where I am right now. And there's all kinds of stuff swirling around, and maybe none of it lands, and maybe none of this goes anywhere, and maybe it shouldn't. I don't know. But I now have the outline. I need to sit down and spend a day working on fleshing out the characters and giving them names. And then I need to start putting words on the page, man. I need to have it written by the end of the summer. So that's my big challenge is Legacy of Shadow took a lot longer than any of my other books. And it's a lot longer than any of my other books. It's half again as long as the longest Wild West Exodus book. And this book looks like it could be roughly the same size, but I have no choice, as I have people that are waiting to see this. And the sickness provided the perfect excuse to procrastinate because, my brain just isn't very creative when I'm struggling to breathe. So that was funny and fascinating as well. And so, so that's where I am. And so don't feel bad if you get writer's block, because it happens to everybody. I'm sure it happens to everybody. It has, and now it's I don't know. Is it writer's block, or is it just procrastination, or is it fear? I don't know, but I have to work through it, and I will let you know next episode whether or not I've started to put words to page. And I'm putting this out there to keep myself honest, because now y'all know where I'm at and where I gotta be. And that's about all I got to say about that this time around. So thanks for listening, and good night.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@the d6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA discussions forum on DACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
In the World Showcase, regardless of country, right? And so we'll see what happens. But all right, cool. Well, enough about petty politics. Let's talk about something really important. Gaming.
Craig, you still feeling bad?
I just went to the doctors, and apparently I got something serious, but They don't know what it was, so I've got 3 different medications I'm on right now.
Right.
So.
Inhale primer, Craig. That'll kill anything.
Is that what I'm hearing? Am I hearing primer?
I thought that was you.
Shaken?
Is it Norbert priming at 3
No,
a.m.?
I have. I sealed a bunch of models last night, and I realized one spot is still a little shiny. So I just
yes.
You get
Fix that before we start recording.
You get major geek cred for 3 a.m. priming, dude.
That's true.
That is.
Well, I'm sitting here with the light on, and I'm looking at the models underneath it, and I'm like, oh,
like with a fresh pair of eyes right there.
Yeah.
So if you pass out in the middle of the show, it's either A, you're tired because it's 3 a.m., or B, you just inhaled too many paint fumes. So it's all good.
Again, this is something you shouldn't tell my wife. She'll be really upset.
Things. She doesn't listen to the show, so we're fine, right? All right.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, fine.